Check, check. Check.
take their seats so we can get started momentarily? Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to call the workshop meeting to order. Michelle, can you please call the roll?
Ex officio member Bruins. Board member Carr. Board member Carrasco. Board member Cortese. Alternate board member Davis. Board member Dieppe. Alternate board member Ellenberg. Alternate board member Fine. Alternate board member Hendricks. Board member Jones. Board member Licardo. Board member McAllister. Alternate board member Miller. Board member Perales. Board member Rennie. Board member Tran. Vice Chair Chavez. And Chair O'Neill.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my board colleagues and everybody from the public and our staff for all being here today this morning. This meeting is being live streamed, and we also have B104 open in case there is a need to have any overflow seating space. I encourage those who plan to address the board to fill out the blue speaker card and submit it to the board office staff. And those who want to speak on the workshop item will be heard at the end of the board's discussion for item 3.1. So the first item on our agenda is public comment. This is for items not on the agenda, and speakers are limited to 2 minutes. And the first card I have is Jim Stallman, and after Jim Stallman will be Edward Mason, followed by Roland LeBrun.
I'm Jim Stallman. I live in Saratoga. And I wanted to call attention to the subject of more money. I think that's always part of the big picture. And some of the things that, if you haven't already looked into, want to pursue would be getting money to run your light rail for free. California has cap and trade. The fuel for my car is free. You could have free fuel for your light rail trains. That's $6 million a year. We have a very capable senator in our county that can do the impossible. So it's just a case of asking and get that revenue from cap and trade. Also, I've told you before, I'd like to see VTA become part of the Big Four at MTC. MTC showers lots of money on their Big Three, but Santa Clara County is, I think at this point we have more commuters coming into Santa Clara County than any other county can boast. We're at least an equal to the other 3 entities that are getting all this money from MTC, so that would be something to pursue. If you don't use it already, MTC has their Lifeline for running night owl service. They also have their ridership incentive. It's been shown time and time again that you put more service out there, you get more riders. So even if it's in the short term, be sure to do that, get that money. And also want to say, for a large operator, VTA has stellar operations staff and frontline personnel. And you may think you have problems, but man, you have the best people I've ever seen in a large operator. Thank you.
Very much. Edward Mason, followed by Roland.
Thank you, Edward Mason. I'd like to make public comment regarding the December 2017 privatization and utilization of VTA property by the private commuter buses. My observations requiring additional refinement would be at the Kirtner and Capitol Light rail stations. My observation is that these buses idle for up to 25 minutes at a time. And they did this also during the Spare the Air Day in November with the massive forest fires. Kirtner Station, the buses operate and stage at the exit lane and not at the abandoned bus stop that was designated for them in that original memo. Now, cost recovery versus market rate. The VTA has a policy of leasing out and renting their property. The Silicon Valley Leadership Group came back with a memo saying, well, they're providing such a valuable service. Well, my view is the public took the risk and invested all of the money to create the system and the infrastructure that we have. We have a capitalistic system, so we should charge for it appropriately and not have it on a cost reimbursement basis. I think it's a matter of privatizing the profit and socializing the cost. So we should be recovering that to put into the general fund with the expected $15 to $25 million operating deficit that you're now experiencing. So I would recommend that in the refinement of this program that we reduce the amount of pollution that's being created by these buses.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Roland?
Thank you, and good morning. My comments relate to meeting format. I'm extremely glad that you will be taking public comment after the item and not before. Now, the main thing I'm concerned about is this presentation. I haven't seen it until I walked out on the website, and I hope that none of you have seen it either. Because if you've seen this before and you've been briefed by staff, potentially you've got some Brown Act issues. So I just thought I'd bring that to your attention because the public haven't seen this.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to the next item for our workshop. Before I turn this over to the general manager, I'd like to remind my colleagues that we want you to really be engaged in the discussion. And feel free to ask questions, and the presentation, the slide deck is loaded on the iPads, and this presentation is like hot off the keys of laptops. So the board members, other than a couple of facilitator, Jeannie is facilitator, and myself, it was being updated up to the last minute, so there was not an opportunity to post it in advance. So this is kind of a beginning. We really all have to be on a journey together as we look at what we really need to do with this organization. And as was pointed out, the public is investing a lot of money and effort and is expecting a lot from us. And so we have some hard work to do, and we're going to begin or continue on that journey today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Nuria Fernandez, our general manager.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to all of you. I have to say I'm really excited that we've had such a great turnout of our board members. As you all may recall, 2 years ago, as part of my goal, I wanted us to have this conversation about the future of transportation in Santa Clara County. And this was before we were discussing budget issues. It was really about our relevancy as we were experiencing a decrease in ridership on our bus and rail network. In addition to that, how the area had continued to be congested. So just looking back at a report that I used as part of my resource reference, back in 2010, MTC and ABAG released Plan Bay Area 2040, and it forecasted that the region was going to be experiencing great growth both demographically and economically. And according to that report, our region's population will be increased by 2 million people by 2040. So that is equivalent to having a 10th county in the 9-county Bay Area region, and within the same confines of the geography. So that is congested. That is added congestion to a already congested region. Last year, there was Santa Clara County added about 9,000 housing units, 35,000 new jobs. That's a 4-to-1 ratio. So what does this all mean to Santa Clara County? What does it mean to our transportation network? It means that we've gone from being the valley of the heart's delight to being the valley of the congestive heart failure. And that's from a traffic perspective. I don't want to make reference to anyone's physical condition, but the reality is that as we gaze back 5 years, we have invested billions of dollars in infrastructure, from highway freeways to bus and rail assets. And with that investment, we are hoping to see an improvement in mobility, in an improvement in our network. But that hasn't happened because more and more people want to be here, and for the right reasons. This is the place where innovation came to be born, and we are generating a lot of good things that are happening right here in the confines of our county. But together with those great things comes great responsibilities. So today what I'm hoping is to have a really honest discussion with our board members and get some guidance by the end of the presentations that we have prepared for you, or throughout the presentations. We are seeking your feedback. Every single one of you represents different areas within our county. You represent not only the residents, but also businesses that are in your county developing and growing. And if we are the congestion management agent for Santa Clara County, and if we are responsible for providing public transportation in Santa Clara County, we want to be working with you, and we're hoping that you would work with us as decisions are being made in your individual cities and in the county in general by the county supervisors, so that we can advance the mandate that we have, and that is to make sure that people can get to where they want to go in a reasonable time. So with that, Madam Chair, I just wanted to let the board members know that in addition to the VTA members that are in the audience, I also have with us at the table Inez Evans, our Chief Operating Officer, Carolyn Gonad, who is the Chief Engineering and Program Delivery, Chris Augustine, who is Chief of our Planning and Programming Development, Scott Haywood, who is one of our Transportation Planning directors under Chris, and Sylvester Fadal, who is the Director of our Human Resources, Gary Miskell, our Chief Technology Officer. So they're going to be here throughout the whole bantering of ideas and discussions, but it's really looking to you all so that we can get on the right path and do all the right things that is expected of us by the county residents. So with that, Madam Chair, I turn it back to you.
So at this point, I'm going to ask Jeannie Bruins, who has graciously offered to facilitate the discussion. She's going to kind of help us keep on track and spur us to really think deeply and to put some ideas out there on the table. So I want to thank Jeannie for offering to do this and turn it over to Jeannie.
Welcome, everybody. And one more staff person I want to introduce at the table is Evelyn Tran. Even though she does not roll up her sleeves in terms of delivery and brain power to think through this, she's the one who keeps us all on the straight and narrow. So let me start with this, talking about the purpose of our workshop today. And this has been a collaborative effort with the executive team here at VTA to try and lay something out. And so we're trying to be thought-provoking here. So this workshop, in terms of our purpose, we want to balance out informing and having to provoke thoughtful discussion. Okay? All too often when we get staff presentation where it's presentation, my observation is, as the board, we start ratcheting back and we're not really engaged. So we're going to try and engage. So you're going to see us try to do that today. I'm going to ask you guys to put on a pragmatic hat, but at the same time put on a visionary hat. We got to deal with both, okay? I want us to be looking at some immediate issues and changes. I want us to look at the longer term, and we're going to provide input on future research and discussion. So there might be things where we have no clue, but we need to really try to pursue a little bit more in terms of more research, et cetera. So the outcome I'm hoping for today is to inform a budget discussion through the Capital Program Committee. That's kind of where this is going to go from here, is over into that arena. Now, how we've designed today is we're going to have, I will call it a short presentation by staff, followed by discussion. Another short presentation, followed by discussion. We will then take a break, and then we're going to get into an in-depth discussion, okay? Where nobody can hide anymore. You're going to all have to start engaging. Let's see. I know, I said there's some of you that are not known to be the shy and quiet type, but we're going to hear from everybody. And so my goal as facilitator today is to really try and get us to that active engagement, okay? So it is okay to ask questions of staff during their presentation. You don't have to sit politely and hold back. It's okay to challenge what staff might be saying. And equally important, if not more important, it's okay to challenge what each board member is saying as well, okay? Because this is how we're going to get more thought-provoking discussion going on. So now, because we're going to be engaged, before we embark on our journey to reimagine transportation, let's get a sense of, as board members, where you think we are. No, we don't have that. So, my question to you, when you think of transportation in Santa Clara County today, what comes to mind? And just jump out. Somebody say something. So, shy, cackling Mr. McAllister, I'm going to pick on you first. What comes to mind? I know.
I haven't thought of this. What do I think of Santa Clara VTA right now, or transportation itself?
Transportation in Santa Clara.
Lacking, poorly lacking, not serving the needs. Mass transit, some of our focus is in the wrong area, and scarce dollars are going into resources that are old and no longer pertinent.
Okay, so I'm going to do this by trying to find microphones that are turned on. So, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I see 1985. We still have the same map. We still have the same technology. We still have the jobs and the people living in the same places. I think we have failed to adapt to the changing valley. And to be honest, I see a major disconnect between the cities and their planning and our transportation service.
Mr. Hendricks.
Yeah, well, it's individualistic.
Okay. Rennie.
First word I'd say would be piecemeal, and I also see, I'm not coming up with the right word, but there's a pull between trying to provide transit for the needy and the desire to try to get more people out of their cars, and both aren't working very well together.
Okay. Deb. Sorry, Miss Davis.
Well, when you say transportation, my first thought is not transit. My first thought is cars in Santa Clara County, because we have more of those and it's easier to get around in them than anything else. That's unfortunate, but that's the thing that comes to mind.
Okay. Morales.
I would agree. I think we're a historically car-centric society that is continually becoming ever more congested due to this extreme growth in population we see year over year.
Thank you. Okay, who has not spoken up? Anybody else have anything they want to add to this? What hasn't been said? Ms. Carrasco. Oh, sorry. Mr. Jones.
Why I was hesitant to say something because I don't want this to come off as I see a broken business model in terms of a disconnect between the needs and desires of the community and population and the service that we offer.
Okay. Ms. Carrasco.
I would just add frustrating, low, if we were to think of public transportation, and doesn't serve the needs, especially the needs of growing families, and doesn't always serve the needs of those that are not as privileged in this valley. And also very complicated.
Anybody else?
I would just say that my impression of it is that you have to plan ahead and add more time onto your commute. So not just the slowness of it, but getting to the platform, waiting for it, the intervals of service compared to other cities or jurisdictions that regularly rely on public transit. I feel that we're not on that level.
Anybody else?
I will.
Chair.
Okay, so I will say that one of the things that I've commented on is that I don't think that we have demanded the same type of innovation from our transportation systems, and it's all encompassing, all the modes that people are mentioning, as we have in all the other aspects of our life. And one of the things I say is you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always gotten. Well, it's gotten worse. And the model, I can't quite figure that out, why people in some ways are resistant to change some aspects of transportation. In other ways, they've adopted changes, but so there's that big lag. And for me, the other thing is that I fear that we are not acknowledging that the impacts of that by still having a carbon-based transportation system, what that's doing to our environment, what it's doing to going to be the lives of everybody in this room, let alone the children and grandchildren of of everybody in this room. And as somebody who works a lot on cleaning up energy, we can only do so much if we don't make fundamental changes in that carbon-based transportation system. We have huge problems. In addition.
Yes.
Could I add?
Yeah.
Listening to my colleagues, I'm kind of taken by transportation system. I'd break it out into kind of two separate pieces. There's almost the roadway, and then there's what are the different things we put on it. Pedestrians, bicycles, cars, buses, Uber, private shuttles. There's really the two different things. As you were talking about, we haven't demanded the innovation. The innovation mostly is happening in the components we put on the roadway surface, not necessarily anything about what the roadway surface. So it's just, there's two separate things at least.
Okay. Gosh, you guys passed the test with flying colors. Thank you very much. I think, Chappie, I think it was you that kind of did somewhat of like an apology before you said what you were about to say. And today is not about making apologies. It's not about making excuses. And I'm actually going to use an analogy. And that is one, I'm going to use it from Steve Jobs, okay? I may put my own twist on this story, so it may not be totally accurate. But yes, so when he was 10 years old, remember he was living in Los Altos, okay? His historic home is in Los Altos. Just saying. But he was earning money by mowing lawns and mowing some of his neighbors' lawns. So one day he was mowing one of his neighbor's lawns, and the neighbor had him stop and pick up basically a rock from the yard, okay? and talked about this being just a dirty old rock. It's probably something that would get in the way and could cause damage with your lawnmower, right? So the guy had him take it into, I think it was the guy's garage. If he was smart, it was in the garage, where he had this device that was turning, okay? And so he had Steve put the rock in this thing that was turning. It goes clang, clang, clang. You know what that thing is? It's a tumbler. It's a rock tumbler, right? And so he had this discussion. It was just this dirty old rock, right? So several weeks later, or days later, whatever, however long, depending on the rock you put in there, he comes back mowing the lawn, and the guy says, remember that rock? And now he pulls it out of the tumbler. And now it's a shiny, beautiful rock, right? That's what we're going to be doing, okay? So we got to talk about these dirty old rocks, okay? You know, Chappie, you brought up a dirty old rock, okay? It's okay. We need to be able to do that without apology. Because if we do this properly, by the time, and it's not necessarily the end of today, okay? Like I said, you don't put the rock in, and 24 hours later or a week later, it's all pretty and shiny. It's made progress, right? But it takes quite a while to get to the actual end result of that shiny rock. So today is not an end to a journey, it's the start of a journey, okay? So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Chris Augenstein, where we're going to move into the first presentation, okay?
Thank you, Jeannie. Good morning, board members. So the world around us is changing quickly. It's almost like we're in a continual state of revolution or evolution, and it's really hard to keep up. So take this example, this image. Has anybody recently seen a payphone anywhere? My 3-year-old son will never use a payphone. He'll never have the need to use a payphone. But he'll have many more opportunities in his life and a whole new range of technological innovations and things will come from those than I will have in my life. And these will be amazing new things. So how fast are things accelerating? I really like this chart because the point of this chart is it underscores just how dynamically the world is changing around us. And we live in this world. You know, this is a point in history that's never before existed. The curve of this is almost vertical. The rate of innovation is exponential. And it's hard for anyone or any one industry even to fully grasp the impacts and opportunities this type of change represents. Think about the smartphone. You know, that's barely 10 years old, and the changes that one technology has had are immense. I mean, much of the stuff we use every day wouldn't be possible without the smartphone. And then think about the internet. You know, that's the internet as we know, it's about 20 years old. If you want to be generous and go back to when AOL was started, it's 1985, it's maybe 30 years old. But point is, even the internet, something that we depend on every day today, is really fairly new in terms of human history. So considering these things and the growth and rate of technology, you know, what's the next 5 years going to bring? What's the next 10 years? Exponential growth. The kinds of things that will be available to us will just be staggering. When we look at the future of transportation in our industry, we must look at things through this new lens. We may not want to be the first to adopt a new technology, but we certainly don't want to be the last to adopt an old technology. And lastly, you can see at the bottom there's 3 bars on that chart, and those represent the common modes of transportation we have today, airplanes, cars, and trains. And this technology, this revolution that we're in, all these things you see on that chart are affecting how these modes are being delivered. And they are going through a renaissance period as well. Innovations happening in each one of those industries at a pretty staggering level. So the transportation industry is being disrupted, and I wanted to just show you a few examples here on this slide. There's no sector of the transportation industry that's not being disrupted, or I like a better term, innovated or evolved. On the upper left is an artist's impression of a Rolls-Royce marine autonomous container ship. It's called the Electric Blue. And a lot of shipping companies are developing these kinds of carriers. The lower left image is the Credo E-Bone bus concept. It's a fuel cell bus that also uses lithium-ion batteries. And the cool thing about that concept is it's a composite frame. It's not a steel frame, but it's a composite frame. And that's something that might be, it could lend itself in a manufacturing technique to 3D printing technology. The upper right is the Lilium jet. This is the first electric jet. It's billed as a vertical takeoff and landing. It's got a 300-kilometer range. It can go 300 kilometers an hour, fully autonomous, on demand, and it's being test flown right now. The lower right is an image representing smart street technology, and this image shows dynamic paint that changes color with the temperature and weather conditions to visually signify potentially hazardous driving conditions to drivers. Technology is also being developed in the street industry that would turn streets into power generators using embedded solar cells, photoreactive paint, and even pressure from vehicles traveling on top of them to generate power. And new communications technology in the street industry, where you have infrastructure to vehicle communications, are ushering in a whole new era of systems management potential. All these new technologies also changing the way we're moving around, and these images, for the most part, represent things that have happened really in the last 10 years, and some of these are only possible because of the phone and the internet. So on-demand everything, the sharing economy, ride-hailing, bike and car sharing, and the key point is that these things didn't exist 10 years ago. None of these things really existed in any meaningful way 10 years ago. Just for fun, I included in the upper right image of the Zapata flyboard. And Google it, you'll find this on YouTube. It's the actual thing. That guy's really flying that. It's essentially a compact flying platform with a pretty decent range and a lot of attitudinal capability. The main takeaway from that, though, is that the little jet engines he developed for that application have application to many other forms of aerial technology. You think about that, and this has been developed in the last 2 years, what's the next 2 years or 5 years going to bring in this industry? So now we want to bring it to the sigmoid curve and how it relates to transit agencies and why this is important. So this is a business tool. A lot of you are business folks, and you'll understand, I'm sure you've seen this type of curve. It's basically something that businesses use when they're evaluating new products or assessing their status within their industry and how they're performing. So at the beginning, you can see that there's, this is the start in the lower left is where resources are put into a new product or new business, and then you begin to get a return. But you better be monitoring yourself before you get to your peak and begin to be assessing whether your products are useful or desirable in the marketplace. And you need to start a new curve. It's kind of like when Pepsi comes out with a new brand. They do that before they get to the peak of the old brand. We can't innovate if we're afraid of risking. We can't innovate. If we don't innovate, we're going to risk decline, and we're not alone in this. We have to build on and complement what we currently do. Think about Sears. Sears didn't respond to the sigmoid curve. Sears was the Amazon of the 20th century, and they're basically gone today. And they did that because they didn't respond to all the downward forces, the downward pressures. They just didn't know what to do. They were paralyzed. They didn't even go flat like that curve, that one option shows. They got on the death curve, the death trajectory, and they were unable to come out of that. We don't want to do that as in the transit industry or in the transportation industry. Certainly, we now have pressures in the transit industry that we never had before. All these personal forms of transportation, private sector competition, these are things. A myriad of things are putting downward pressure on us, so we need to come up with a myriad of things to bring upward pressure so we can begin to have a new trajectory on the sigmoid curve. So industry trends. Every word you see here are common elements in the industry, common elements that we're pursuing and developing with new technologies, and it's happening in all modes. We're moving toward cleaner, more efficient systems, which not only helps the environment, but also means that we'll be able to do much more with the financial resources we currently have. So getting more with what we have, getting more with less. Everything is becoming linked and connected. Think of the Internet of Things. This is happening in transportation too. And this connected and information-rich environment is opening a whole bunch of new opportunities for personalized travel experiences. These trends are also ushering in new types of service that will make traveling more personalized and useful. More seamless travel, all forms of transportation having greater connectivity and more usefulness for consumers. Moreover, these represent opportunities in my view, in our view. It kind of reminds me of Einstein saying we cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We have to think differently. That brings us to the close of the first piece.
Before you go on, I'd like to ask everybody, and I'm going to do it right now, I'm going to put my iPad down and close it so that I'm not distracted. So if we could try to, for the board members to be focused on what the discussion's going to be, it would be. Thank you, Jeannie.
Okay. So I promised you, small segment. So, question. Anybody have any questions for staff? Anything you want to challenge in what Chris just got through telling you?
So we have this innovation center. What's come out of our innovation center since it was a grand opening?
I think that's a great question, and I'm going to ask Gary Miskell, who heads up our Innovation Center, to bring you up to speed on all the great things that they have been working on.
Thank you, John.
Ugly or set up?
Yes, that's right.
You
Yes.
kind of sound like a
Yes,
plant.
yes. So I think that actually we've come out with a number of innovations. As an example, we worked with Caltrain on kind of doing a joint mobile ticketing and that. So we have Easy Fare, and we worked with Caltrain. So you can buy a Caltrain and a VTA companion ticket on that, as well as for doing events and things like that. So it was kind of an innovation project that we worked on. We improved our entire RTI, our real-time information. So the quality of our real-time information was okay, but we thought it could be better. And so we worked with, we did a hackathon and selected one of the companies that did that was called Swiftly, that was part of that hackathon. And then we continued to work with them, and they got investments, and they built out their product, and we're now using them as our real-time information with considerably more accuracy on that, and we reduced the number of touch points that the RTI data goes through, and so it improved the reliability of our real-time information. We were like one of the early people to go put Wi-Fi on all of our trains and buses. We just got finished upgrading the CCTV on our light rail system. And we didn't just put CCTV kind of normal out there. What we really did is we looked at, well, what could we really do to improve and, the safety and the security of our system by using CCTV? And in that particular case, we made it where OCC can actually log in to the cameras. And so if there's so if the driver identifies an incident, or if somebody calls us and says there's something going on, they actually can now log in and actually see what's going on in real time. It's also a very high definition and the exceptionally high quality CCTV. So, there's another example. In our electric bus right now, electric buses have a whole new list of parameters that we have to manage to be able to manage a fleet of electric buses. So we identified a number of the shortcomings or issues that would impact operations both in the yard and in the field, and we got a grant from the CEC to go in and develop an application that will manage electric buses in the yard and the whole charging process, and try to reduce the amount of energy, or when we're paying for energy, because we create a charge plan for every bus. And then when the bus leaves the yard and in the field, we worked with Clever Devices with a number of customizations and changes to their product that will then monitor the electric vehicle as it's going out and in the field. So that is actually all that's right now on the electric bus is actually being built. And I'm going to actually, whoever's in the SSTP&O, I'm going to present that today at the SSTP&O.
I have one request of staff. Please don't use acronyms.
Oh, okay. I'll do what I
Not
can.
everybody in the room knows them. I'm not familiar with them all, and the audience would be appreciative on that.
Sorry about that. As the technology guys, we kind of live with
I know.
acronyms, but I will do my best to back off on those. Yeah, but the real-time information, yeah. So those are just a handful. We probably have done some 30 or 40 different innovation projects that have kind of come out of that.
Veterans Affairs and some of the partnerships with the Department of Energy and others, please.
Yes, yeah. So we've gotten a number of public. So we've partnered with Prospect Silicon Valley in the San Jose area. So they're one of our key partners. We've partnered with a number of universities, both local as well as like Lehigh University. We just completed filling out a grant application with the DOE with Lehigh University. So there's an example of some of the things that we've been doing on the innovation front.
Well, what have you done for hardware or actually getting buses to move quicker and be more efficient and get more people on, like signalization and getting that type of hardware out into the...
So the our ITS team, which actually is part of Casey's group in that, has a project that they're working with the city DOT on.
What's ITS?
The information transportation systems. And so that would be like the signaling systems within the city. So the VTA has a team of people that are all of the Department of Transportation engineers are part of this team across all of your cities and county. And together we've been working on, both commonizing what is the common, how can we have common, transportation interaction. So having one transportation signaling system talk to another. So in other words, having Mountain View talk to San Jose or Mountain View talk to Santa Clara. And so the two signaling systems can talk to each other, as well as having maybe a common database of the signaling data. And we're looking at the ability of maybe having the signaling data be able to talk to autonomous cars in the future.
Mr. Hendricks?
Yeah, so what you just said is all really good and important. I'm sure all those projects are, but I'll just say most of those things sounded like evolution, not innovation. In terms of the presentation of what was shown, I didn't hear anything at all about funding and how it's all going to be paid for. And I didn't hear anything about, big pipes versus first mile, last mile, and how those things get integrated together. Problem of what that's in the broader transportation piece because we spend a lot of time building pipes, and it's then the issue is how do you get people to the pipes to use them. So those are my reactions, not necessarily questions.
Okay, so this is, and we're not going to comment on that. Okay, I'm sorry, because we're not going to comment on that. Only because, again, going back, the slide presentation, okay, is kind of setting the tone. We're going to try and get through all of the presentation part all within the first hour of our 3-hour session. So in our 2-hour remaining is when we're going to go and deep dive into some of these other things. What are some of the other issues and such that we need to be looking at? So I'm going to, any other comments, questions based on the little snippet that you saw today? Mr. Jones.
Thank you. You mentioned disruption. And obviously, on the technology curve, technology is a hockey stick straight up. So we're encountering disruptive technologies all the time. I want to get a better understanding of VTA's strategy in terms of countering these disruptive technologies. What is our plan, or do we have a process in place to identify and address those technologies? Happen.
Well, thanks, Chappie, for that. I would answer that this is part of that process. This is part of this particular workshop is to address that very question, to get a better understanding of how we can and should be responding to these new opportunities and these things we see happening around us. So this particular session is designed to do that. I will say though that we've rooted this mindset in the strategic plan. What our vision is to innovate the way Silicon Valley moves, and so that's something that's embedded in our strategic plan. And now we need to figure out how we get there and what that really means. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and we need to look at ourselves critically to evaluate our structure and how money comes into this agency, how money goes out of this agency, what our constraints are, what our opportunities are, and this meeting here today is part of that conversation.
So a potential outcome from this meeting would be conceivably to form a working group that would be tasked to identify and respond to emerging technologies as we encounter them. Would that be a logical path forward?
I'll tell you what, we're going to capture that, in the 2-hour segment. Okay. So it's okay. And again, it's okay because remember, you're only getting little bites at a time, and this is great because you want more. We're going to get to that more. Promise.
And I'll just close on this point is I view VTA as the taxi industry, encountering, the Ubers and Lyfts. And I don't want us to go the way of the taxi industry. I want us to be part of that whole ecosystem.
I think we completely agree with that. That's why we showed the sigmoid curve, because if we don't respond to that kind of pressure, we don't respond to that kind of opportunity, then that is a risk.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Miller.
Oh, mine was just related to innovation in general, and maybe some comment towards Gary, which is there are two models for innovation. HP, their tagline was innovates, but their model was incremental innovation. They were constantly doing little things to improve what they already have, and pretty much everything Gary had on his list was improving stuff we had. The other model of innovation is sort of the Apple model, where everything is a quantum step, and they are willing to do giant, new, totally strange and foreign, and hoping to land on a good thing. And I wonder about the incremental approach, because I think it tends to lag. And I will just point out, our city, we just finally gave up. We're doing a new signalization project for the whole city, and there is no way to interface with any other cities or anybody else, even though we've been discussing for 10 years what standards, how we're going to make all this work. There isn't one. So we're moving forward, and we are going to do a system, and we've asked, in the future, is it adaptable? And it was, yes, should VTA decide what they want to do, we can adapt our system. And this is not new. We did this this week.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, Mr. Rennie.
So 2 comments towards the innovation. I'm 200% for technology innovation. I want to remind us that there's a people component. It's not just sort of a technical. And I think we're really a consumer company. We are successful when many people choose to use our product. So, and think about, your grandmother who still doesn't have a smartphone, or the guy that's still using a flip phone or something like that, right? Not everybody wants to use the technology. But on the other hand, I want to say innovation isn't just technology. Innovation can be in ways that we do things also. And if I could throw one of the dirty rocks out there, I think there's a stigma of a lot of people about riding a bus. So if we use technology, or we use what a bus looks like, or we use the way the bus is provided, or the experience you have on the bus, we could use innovations like that. So we know, for example, the Google buses are really successful, people riding them because they get on and they don't feel like they're riding a bus. They feel like they're riding their own mobile office. So that stigma isn't there. So I would encourage us to think about innovations that aren't just technical, but let's say, I'll throw a wild idea out there to try to illustrate. Let's have a business center portion of our buses. Maybe we're getting rid of our express buses, the long haul ones. But let's say you had a business section that maybe somebody had a monthly pass to use the business section instead, and then throw another dirty rock out there. We need to take care of our homeless, but the buses are not the right place to do it, and I think it's hurting. If you're trying to get people to ride the bus, the average commuter doesn't want to be sitting next to the homeless. So my thoughts.
Okay. So I want to keep us moving on target here. So before I turn it back over, there's a couple of things. You guys, we're really hot, okay? It's always easy to look at something that we're doing and see what's wrong with it, right? I mean, John, you kind of kicked us off in that thing. That's always easy. The harder thing is starting with that blank piece of paper, right? You're looking at a blank piece of paper. What do we do? Rob, you kind of sat there and gave, my shorthand in my notes is think about a business center on a bus, okay? But anyway, we're going to have to do both. And so when we get to that 2-hour segment, I'm going to pull on all of you guys to try and say, don't sit here and start from where we are. It's that whole evolution versus innovation, okay? It's the whole element. I heard some comments about how are we responding to these advancements, these disruptors. I want us to also ask ourselves, what are the disruptors we need to be creating in order to move our services to get to where we need to be? Maybe it's not just about us reacting, because that kind of puts you behind, versus where are we needing to get outside of our comfort zone and think about being the disruptor. So instead of responding to it, how do we cause our own necessary disruption? Okay? So now with that, what we're going to do now is we're moving on to the next piece of the presentation. So again, that first section was really focused in on just disruption, more generic. Now what we're going to do is go into looking at the things that are more directly related in terms of the transportation.
Thank you. So we've organized this next section into these, next piece of the discussion into these 4 focus areas. When you look at this diagram, as sort of the puzzle pieces are trying to show, is that these are all interrelated and interconnected. None of these things stand apart or separate from one another. Infrastructure, vehicles, workforce development, new service models. When we think about transportation, these things are all completely interrelated. And each is potentially subject to disruption or evolution, really, and opportunities, many new opportunities like never before. Carolyn Gona will cover the first section on infrastructure.
Good morning. Yeah, so I think today is, I think as staff, we've been working together. I know Casey was mentioned earlier. He's our director. He does the highway program and our mobility programs, along with Chris and Gary. I think we have a lot of questions as well as to how we move forward with the agency based on resources that we have and the technologies that we can use. So I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure today. You know, taking stock of the VTA assets, what we own and what we have under our control, and determine how to optimize the use of those is really a vital task for our agency in the future as to what we want to do and how we're going to shape our future using them. So for an example, the Jackson Transportation Authority recently has been undertaking an assessment of what their best use is for the existing SkyRail system. And their effort has turned out to be more than just a transportation improvement project, but also a way of how do you connect the Jacksonville experience. So one of those questions is, how do we connect that Silicon Valley experience, the Santa Clara County experience? The next focus area, we'll talk a little bit about the discussion of the future of transit with Inez and Chris. But when it comes to infrastructure, what should be the role that we envision for all the miles of light rail guideway we own or other assets that we own? Should we start to reimagine the use of those similar to the way Jacksonville is looking at, you know, how can they make their right-of-way more valuable and be used and optimize it? What about the transit centers? We actually currently are trying to move more forward with redevelopment and really integration of other uses other than just transit there. And how do we take a look at that? We have a joint development program, but to take a look at those assets that we have. We're in the early stages of building our priced management lane systems. We have 4 currently in the Bay Area, 5 are under construction. We will have 4 under construction hopefully within the next few years. But, you know, there's other areas like Dallas where they have spent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to do it, but they're seeing a huge benefit coming back and a large revenue source coming back to put into other mobility programs that also optimize the use of those managed lanes. Many of the signal systems was mentioned a little bit earlier. They're still today are based on the technologies of 1980. And that's some of the issues that we're having. There's funding sources available today where we could really use to upgrade the traffic signal system so that they're more responsive to all modes of travel. And how do we optimize better use of our light rail system with those travel systems, the use of the automobile? I worked in this with signals many, many years before I came to VTA, and it's not much different than it was 20 years ago when I came here as well in working with the signal systems that we have today. And with all the signal systems that are either owned by the local jurisdictions, us or Caltrans, VTA can play a major role in working with everybody to try to develop something that really meets our needs better and really move that forward. The infrastructure decisions like the ones I've just mentioned and others have to result in the benefits to our commuters, and that is a focus about how do we respond working with the commuters throughout the county, not just our riders of our transit system, but everybody else. We are really responsible for the Congestion Management Agency and those issues that resolve around that. This requires that our systems try to work together, and VTA is prepared to work with the stakeholders, but one of the questions we have today is how do we move forward there? Just want to go to the next slide a little bit on the trends for infrastructure use and operation. Chris mentioned a lot of these activities and what some of the trends are. I just want to focus a little bit about mobility as a service provider, or as a service rather. Really, mobility as a service describes a shift away from personally owned modes of transportation and towards mobility services that are consumed as a service. So the key concept behind mobility as a service is to offer travelers mobility solutions based on their travel needs. Side Labs, which is one firm, and there's other ones like WIM and other ones, have recently announced its CORD. It's described as an integration platform for mobility providers, navigation tools, and urban infrastructure. And VTA has a role in being able to work on those activities as well. I mean, it's connecting developers of all the apps in a way that it pulls your parking and your tolls and your bike sharing, your transit services all together so you have a more seamless experience. And there are 3 ways in this vision to do something like that where VTA can play a leader in the region for this. One is that we gather and we manage a lot of data that goes into the apps or can be used for ourselves as well in developing our own apps. We have a lot of real-time information. If we optimize the transportation infrastructure that we own and control, and we provide mobility services and solutions that are part of those services to be provided. If we collaborate with all these partners, we are actually able to try to ensure the best and long-lasting mobility for Silicon Valley. And that's one of the things that we're starting to take a look at is, well, how should we be that? How should we be a leader in coordinating a lot of those activities and providing something that really is mobility as a service, and how does the board envision that? So that concludes the section on infrastructure.
So I'm going to talk about the next 2 sections.
Sorry, the delay on the microphone. So just a reminder, if you have any questions in real time, it's okay to ask the questions. I'm going to try and keep us moving through this, but if you had a clarifying question, go ahead and ask.
Can I throw one thought in that this generated? Chappie mentioned sort of business models, and we think of delivering service, but I'm not sure we think like a startup company that's trying to figure out how they're going to make the money. So if we're going to be a coordinator of the MAS, how do we make some money out of that to fund our operations? I think we should try to think a little bit like that. Obviously, we're not here to make a big profit, but clearly, since we're fighting to keep our operating budget balanced, we should also be thinking of, okay, as we're innovating to these new ways, where's there money in it for us? That's how a startup innovation company would be thinking also.
Okay, so I'm just going to. I'm sorry.
If I could also add, if you're going to talk about mobility as a service, and that's kind of the software world, platform as a service, all those kind of things. Meaning, we're really trying to be the standards for the definition of an MMAS. Really, multiple sides. There's the standards of how you define it all, how you make it actually work, versus then everybody, once you have those standards available. What is your thought around that?
I think we look at this as an opportunity for being the integrator, being an overall manager to help integrate these services. But that's the product that we want to help offer to the public.
I would just offer again, if we're in Silicon Valley, when we talk about software, there's standards, there's all the developers of stuff, and then there's integrators. And the integrators probably had the most difficulty of everybody who did that stuff in how things operate. So.
Point noted. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the next generation.
Before you begin, Howard brought up something. Do we have an innovation budget? Or an R&D budget, as some people say, because you look at companies that are moving up, they'll say, you look at how the early ages in the 80s, they say 10% HP was known for having a large R&D. and then as some companies had started to go down, their R&D went smaller. So where are we? Do we have an R&D budget or innovation budget? Constant? Is it flexible? Is it?
Okay, so the answer to your question is no. There is not a separate research and innovation budget. What we do have is through our capital program process, we identify technology improvements that are necessary for us to not only update and modernize some of our systems, but opportunities for us to provide local match to grants that we're working in collaboration or partnership with others. So that's the current channel that we address innovation, and that's one of the reasons why this conversation is so important, because if in fact we're going to take a hard look at our business model, and that the result of that is for us to take a look at the technology that's going to support that, and other, it's not necessarily just technology, but other decisions that are going to be that are going to help us frame the new approach to how we're going to be providing services and how we're going to be assisting cities in mobility. We may want to create a separate line item or separate section within the budget that then speaks to all the different things that we're doing towards that goal. But the short answer is no, there's not an innovation. Our core business right now is just to provide services, do the construction for Caltrans on the highway programs that we manage within the county, and everything else we try to include or integrate through our capital program.
Yeah, very quickly. I hate to admit this, but many times when it comes to these very innovative technology issues, I have my 15 and 14-year-old and my 13-year-old explain these to me. So pretend you're my 13-year-old explaining it to her 51-year-old mother. So would you just elaborate just a little bit more on this mobility as a service? Because I want to get a picture of it. Tell me how that would work out on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like?
But I think one you might visualize this as having an application on your smartphone where you can access all modes of transportation in one spot. You don't have to go out and look at different things. You can see on your phone, like if you're at point A, you can see all the potential transportation options available to you, an Uber trip or a bike trip or a scooter trip or a transit trip. It could be bus and rail, it could be Caltrain. You can see all those things from one application. So that's sort of looking at this thing as a package of services rather than I'll go to the VTA website for my light rail, I'll go to the Caltrain website for my Caltrain, I'll go to the Uber website for my Uber and Lyft. It's kind of that idea.
And so that's what I thought it was. And I love that idea. I think it's, for me, believe it or not, I figured out how to use my smartphone, and so that would work perfectly for me. But I do want to remind you, in the city of San Jose, for example, there's 95,000 folks that still don't have access to internet, and so they mostly live in my district. They live in Councilmember Perales' district and Councilmember Esparza's district. And I imagine that throughout the county, there's probably a good chunk that live in Sunnyvale, a good chunk that live in some of the other cities, because I don't think that they're exclusive to San Jose. And so they still don't have smartphones. I imagine also that it would be really hard for someone who really needs public transportation and who don't know how to use this form of beautiful technology. And so it's really interesting to be in Silicon Valley, where we're really innovative that way and where we have access to this, that we create sometimes these tools, and we tend to leave certain folks behind. And as my mother used to say, where she came from a very little tiny town in Mexico, and they were dirt poor, she said to me, we didn't know we were poor because everybody was poor. We didn't realize that we didn't have what we didn't have until we got here to the U.S. And then she worked her butt off, right, to achieve the American dream. And so this is where people suddenly realize that they don't have what they don't have, because we create such disparity. And so I just really want to caution us about using such wonderful technology. I don't want to, I wouldn't want not to create this, but then how do we bring those folks that don't have access to it, or don't know how to use it, or will never be able to use it, like the immigrant woman who's 80 years old but needs to get on that bus, and we begin to exclude them from it.
Just, I think there is an aspect of that when we can't ignore it. Maybe the private sector can ignore it. I don't think VTA can ignore exactly what you're talking about. Is how, even if you did that, how do we work with others to be able to either get them that technology? And you're right, some people may never be able to use that technology, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't be able to have that. So that's something that the board will always have to think about, as well as funding those types of activities. Like, you know, is there a way to get phones, you know, is there a social service type program to provide technology to people and the apps and money? I mean, most people need a credit card or something hooked up to their phones, and so those are all equity issues that we would have to discuss. And that's one reason as a public agency, we're probably in a better position to do that, and this board to take that on.
Now we're going to move forward with a lens in terms of looking at some the vehicles and what's happening in terms of vehicles. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. So we're going to show you what the industry is looking at as next generation light rail vehicles and next generation bus vehicles. And part of the reason we want to show you these today and begin this discussion is because we have some decisions coming up about fleet purchases. We're going to have to be, the board's going to be having to make decisions about what is the next generation of fleet we buy, and do we keep doing what we're doing, or do we take a paradigm shift and move into something completely different? We also want to engage in a discussion about right-of-way. And when we look at the public, one of the public's assets going forward, we think that the right-of-way, the roadway network, our dedicated transit guideways, and so on, will be the public currency of the future. This is where we think public agencies will have a lot of influence and a lot of say. So on light rail vehicles, most of the ideas that we're going to say, and then again, this is just a sample, relate to sort of the departing from the standard century-old tradition of using overhead catenary wires. And there are a lot of maintenance benefits to that, which translates into cost benefits, and there's also a lot of urban design benefits from migrating away from an overhead catenary system. So the first is the Kinkisharo e-brid system, and this uses two forms of power. It's a ground-based system that gets power from an embedded rail that only turns on when the vehicle is over it, so you can walk over it and not be shocked. And it also charges onboard power cells, so it can run without having that infrastructure for a little bit of time if it needs to. So again, this is a system that doesn't use overhead catenary, and it's more of kind of a streetcar system. Bombardier also provides a catenary-less system for both bus and rail vehicles. They bill this as being available, a system available for all modes of surface transportation, so cars, buses, trucks, and so on. It's basically wireless charging. It's through inductive charging. Pulls up into a station, and plates kind of come in close proximity to each other and charges the battery systems very quickly. And so you can envision something like this being applied across platforms to bus or rail. This is showing a bus and a rail vehicle using the same station facilities. Alstom has developed a hydrogen-powered system. This is being tested in Germany right now. It's completely based on hydrogen. It doesn't use any electrical or inductive charging at all. Onboard fuel cell is hydrogen-powered, no catenary. The Insaldo system is, again, using the embedded rail. And again, so it charges only when it's over the rail, and it can quick charge at stations. So those are just sampling. There's a lot of industry interest in this. A lot of companies are innovating in this field. So the question for us when we begin thinking about the future of light rail in Santa Clara County is, do we want to begin exploring these kinds of systems? And is this something we should be working actively to migrate towards, or do we simply replace the fleet we have with all the infrastructure we have? And I don't know, Inez, did you want to add anything to this? Or
just that when you're considering all of these great-looking vehicles, you also have to take into account what Carolyn was talking about, the infrastructure. You know, our rails sit up on top. Many of these require embedded track systems, bearing the power supply systems further down into the ground. So it's not just looking at the vehicle, but also what it will cost to also bring forth this new technology when it comes to the infrastructure, and whether or not the vehicle will align with our current rail platforms, because our current vehicle is a customized vehicle. It was not an off-the-shelf model. So there are many cascading items when you're considering what the new rail car will look like.
Thanks. Okay, now we'll move on to buses. And I'm just going to basically go through the same thing with the next generation of buses and show you a few examples of what the industry is thinking about right now in developing. The first is the wheelie bus, and this is kind of a cool idea where the bus basically is clothed in transparent LCD panels, and the LCD panel technology like this is in serial production throughout the world, and basically this panel can become transparent, so it could become clear, or it could display anything you see here. This is displaying route information as well as a graphic on the side, but there could be advertising. It could show all kinds of different things. So it could become clear in certain circumstances and dark in others, and the persons inside the bus would actually be able to see through what you see on the outside here. This is a concept bus. It's designed in concept to be all electric and semi-autonomous, migrating to completely autonomous operation, and the ability to be operated in consists, so buses operating together like train cars would. Next is the Mercedes-Benz Future Bus. This is actually in prototype production. They are testing this around the world. It's electric. They bill it as being fully autonomous, but it hasn't operated in a fully autonomous mode. And again, it's being tested right now. And this is something you can Google and see on the internet too. There's some pretty cool videos about it. Volvo is one of the biggest innovators in technology throughout the world, across all transportation platforms. This is an example of the Volvo autonomous bus. And this is using inductive charging that comes through the catenary plate, basically the pantograph raises when it comes into a station and quick charges at the station. So there's no need for wires, nothing in the roadway. The charging happens at select spots throughout the route. And Easy Mile, this is a company that is doing a lot of prototype and testing throughout the world. They have a big facility in Denver. It's autonomous. It's relatively slow speeds. It's being tested in fairly closed environments right now. And we have a project that is potentially going to be using this that I think Gary might want to say something about.
So we may not actually be using Easy Mile, but it's the concept. So this is what I would call is really a more disruptive concept of what we're working on here. And what we're working on is that, as an example, in Dublin and in Dublin, California, they've got an Easy Mile that they're going to be running from the BART station in. Well, what we did is we said, well, let's take that a major step forward, and we said, look at our whole paratransit, and how can we apply autonomous vehicles to a paratransit and to first and last mile for people that have disabilities. And so we went and got an idea grant to go off and add accessibility and automation to the vehicle to help the passengers get on and off. So the idea would be like, artificial intelligence to identify who the passengers are, and then the vehicle would adjust itself to understand what those customers' needs are. So if that person speaks Spanish, then the vehicle would say, I recognize that this person speaks Spanish, and would speak to the person in Spanish. And then, or if this person is Vietnamese, would then speak to that person in Vietnamese. So the whole idea is that the vehicle would adjust itself depending on the passenger's needs and requirements. And we believe that that would be required or could be used and leveraged in terms of our paratransit services, as well as first and last mile for those individuals that have special needs.
That is actually a very innovative project because the industry is not paying a lot of attention to accessibility issues, and the project that Gary's talking about, the VTA is leading, is going to be looking at a lot of those issues, and potentially the industry might take note of what comes out of that study. The last one I wanted to show you is an autonomous rapid transit vehicle that's being tested in China. It's developed by a company called CRRC. They call it the wireless trackless light rail. It's being actually tested in a number of cities throughout China. They've built it as a virtual rail system, so it basically tracks lines on the street rather than operating on rails. This could potentially be looked at as a bus option too. The point of all the stuff we've been showing in the last few minutes is that there's a lot going on in the industry. There's a lot of innovation happening in vehicles, and as an agency, we must be aware and frankly respond to these opportunities that are before us. Like I mentioned earlier, we don't want to be the last to adopt an old technology, but we have to be very careful about adopting a new technology. So, this is a question upcoming for the board. What does this mean for our next fleet purchases? And those decisions are coming soon. We'll be engaging you in more conversation about that in the coming months. A little bit about what all this means too in putting it out a service on the street. So all this new technology, there's just a whole bunch of things we can do with it, and we're exploring a number of ways we can apply this technology. I want to point out that by understanding market segmentation, we can really get a grasp on what kind of services we want to craft with the technology that's both here today and might come in the future. Many of you were not on the board when we did our first market segmentation study, but we did the only market segmentation study we've done at VTA back in 2006 and 2007 that informed the comprehensive operational analysis we did in 2008. And I can tell you a really interesting thing that came from that. We had 6 market segments, and the market segment that we call transit dependent, that study told us that we were only getting 50% of that market. It's a market that we should be getting 100% of. And so what we did in that comprehensive operational analysis, or COA, is we designed the services to tap into that market segment. And when we implemented that service plan, we had 18 months straight of ridership increases. It was really, really dramatic and on a pretty steep curve up because we had tapped into a market. We understood a market segment and we developed a product that better served that market. So it went up 18 months straight until the economy tanked, and then everything fell apart. But market segmentation should be part and parcel, we think, of whatever VTA does in the future. All this new technology can certainly enhance customer experiences. We can operate all kinds of different new types of service. For example, platooning buses, where trips can be customized to traveler needs. You can envision a series of buses running in a dedicated guideway at very high speeds, but then coming into and out of that guideway to serve different markets. So there might be one pickup area, kind of like a Google bus operates, one kind of condensed pickup area, gets on a guideway, operates with in a consist together, and then when it goes off to where it needs to go, that bus breaks off and serves a particular market segment. Also potentially an express bus market, things like crowdsourcing could help us craft way more productive express bus services where people go online, they crowdsource, they tell VTA, we want to go from here to here, and when there's a critical mass for providing that trip, then maybe that's a service we provide, and it's a more dynamic and sort of quasi-on-demand kind of system. And these are just some of the ideas that we're thinking about with new transit service models when we think about all the technology and innovation that's happening in the industry. So I'll show you a little video that talks about some of the things that we've mentioned so far in the workshop today.
The world is changing fast. Cities are growing and urban population is rising. The need for transport of people and goods are increasing, but so is congestion, air pollution, road accidents, and climate change. We need more mobility, but we have to do it in a smarter way. This is our scenario for the future. Outside the city, vehicles and autonomous trailers are operating within safe and confined areas. Electric vehicles are charged while goods are loaded. A driver enters to lead the connected convoy onto the public roads, where dedicated bus lanes should be used if possible. Autonomous connected trailers create safe, modular, and flexible vehicle convoys adapting to transportation needs. Adjusting to schedule updates, the flexible convoy switching goods along the way, a mobile consolidation center. The transport system is enabled through an integrated cloud platform, connecting vehicles, people, infrastructure, and logistic partners. In the city, the sensors of the autonomous refuse truck detect all movements in the vicinity of the environment and reacts automatically to any potential incidents, making sure citizens are safe and preventing accidents before they happen. Bus platooning will improve efficiency and capacity in city public transportation. With silent, emission-free buses, we can bring public transport closer to people and even drive inside of buildings. This opens up completely new opportunities for city planning. Fast and efficient way of charging from the electric grid at the end terminal in just a few minutes. How do we build the cities and the infrastructure of tomorrow in a more sustainable way? The future is electric. Zero emission and low noise gives the electric compact excavator access to environmental zones in the city. Imagine a silent and emission-free city. Imagine a cleaner, safer, and more resource-efficient world without compromising our everyday life and health. The future is now, and we are ready.
Right, the future is now, and that's true. The reality is,
It looks like we're going from, devices and technology into workforce. Would now be a good time to maybe talk about what we just saw? Well, if you don't want to, that's fine.
No, so I would prefer if we can go ahead and do, this is the last segment. We have 4 quadrants. We talked about infrastructure, we talked about vehicles, we talked about service models. Now we're going to talk about workforce, because workforce is a key element in all of that as well. Okay.
thank you, Ms. Brown. Top right slide in front of you sort of shows what we all know. I know Board Member Miller referenced 1985, and that can sort of remind us of 1985, where we had what is called the toll lane. And most times when you get stuck in one of those lanes, we know what it is, and it's called the slippy track. What VTA is doing today is to sort of embrace what is called the concept of an agile corporations. Golden Gate Bridge a few years ago recognized, thank you. The Golden Gate Bridge a few years ago recognized that most of the classifications you have today in the transportation industry will eventually be obsolete. And one of those is the toll takers that became obsolete a few years ago, though we still have a few of them. Thousands of toll takers all around the country had their classifications sunsetting, and they needed new careers, which called for extensive cross-training across the transportation industry. But then with technology comes a lot of classifications that would require the same set of skills enhancement, continuous training, and just understanding how you merge the complexities of innovative technology and existing workforce. And that calls for creating what is called an agile organization or an agile workforce environment. This essentially entails building a corporation that is flexible and fluid, that embraces the use of technology, companioned with speed, and understanding the importance of beginning to migrate a lot of the skills, existing skills you have today, into future skills to augment the change that happens in the field of technology. And what does that all mean? Recognizing your existing human capitals, regardless of technology, is driven by people. And the byproduct of an agile corporations is a reduction in staff. It's not by laying them off, it's by recognizing you can begin to cross-train and tap into the innate skill set of your existing employees by cross-training them in different areas so they can begin to migrate into new roles and begin to sort of bring great and amazing skill set and values to corporations. Golden Gate sort of transitioned a lot of previous toll takers into different roles. You have most of them sort of serving as what you call toll administrator, sitting behind computers and sort of tracking what goes on with most of these toll booths. Some transitioned into service mechanics and different kind of very great career track with the corporations, while there were a few natural attrition for those who sort of retired and were bridged out into retirement. So what does the future look like for the agency? Preparing for tomorrow's workforce by upskilling. So VTA may not have toll takers, but we do have a lot of classifications that are very likely to be obsolete a few years from now. And beginning to recognize that and building programs that helps those employees or those classifications transition into new roles as the need applies is what we're starting to embrace, so we can sort of create an environment where technology happens, your human capital is ready, the skill set of the workforce is sort of prepared and ready to take on those new roles, and your productivity sort of rises to a much higher level. So, what are some of the existing plans? Beginning to build new technological training sort of skill set for most of our employees. Creating what is called a flexible organizational structures, like you see with most of your high-tech corporations. Amazon embraces the agile corporation concept by sort of reviewing its structural design biannually, which means sticking to the status quo of building the structural design that sustains the test of time year after year is starting to evolve and it's changing. So we're starting to embrace that. Reviewing classifications that brings minimum overall value to existing business process and tapping those folks for increasing skills enhancement, readiness for new levels, and sort of challenging them gradually to understand the fundamental importance of their new roles and assigning them accordingly. Without conflating an agile corporation with the new generation environment, with technology, it's a lot easier to train people that are what is considered next gen or next generation. But what some transit agencies have recognized, LA Metro being one of them, is building a very powerful human resources and human capital development team that identifies those classifications, sort of identifies the employees and begin to build their skill set. And believe it or not, productivity rises when skill set is enhanced, efficiency rises, and overall the agency begins to perform a whole lot better than it should. So yes, technology of the future as it relates to human capital is now. And we're starting to explore some of those options and identifying ways we can begin to tap into those great values of our existing employee base.
Okay, so I'm trying to look at the time. We're sitting here at 10:30, and like I said, our deep dive comes in after this. So what I'm going to do is very quick. I told you we can challenge question. If we can keep our questions succinct here. Any questions, reactions to this before we start putting on our own thinking caps? Oh, the other category. Okay. So I'm gonna ask. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Miller.
You've always overlooked me, Jeannie.
I know.
No, I just said.
Oh no.
That's why they put me next to him. So this is a workforce question, and there's actually many people around this table who probably have some insights into this. So I watched the bridge transition with great interest, and I actually have friends who are toll takers. The biggest issue is not being able to provide additional training. It appears as though the biggest issue is fear. And so if you look at the toll taker thing overall, the Golden Gate Bridge District did this in a giant swoop. And the other bridge districts, there's the one, has sort of locked themselves in. So I pick on the Bay Bridge, where 60% of the cars are fast track enabled, but because of the labor situation, they are limited to far less than 60% of the lanes being fast track only. So how do we actually conquer the fear issue when you have a guy who's got a good paying job and he fears that that job is going to go away? And even though we could offer training, and we do, how do you overcome fear if you're going to develop the workforce?
Well, with most of the classifications in reference, these are collectively bargained positions. It calls for some sort of collaborations with the unions, letting them understand the importance of beginning to migrate skill set to new knowledge-based classifications where these employees could essentially transition into new roles where the compensation is almost similar in nature, but takes very minimum training, sort of training enhancement for these folks to be able to change careers. Toll takers traditionally only required very minimum skill set and educational base. When you begin to train people who've traditionally done the same type of job for 20, 25 years, and you're having them learn to use computers sort of forcefully, that's an uphill battle. And that's the reason why Golden Gate had a full swoop and had the union issues. If you recall, there were a lot of contentious discussions with the unions. It hasn't happened with the Bay Bridge and the rest of them because it's been incremental. But what you would notice with the Bay Bridge, toll taker boots is gone down from 5 to almost 2. So if you ever get stuck on one of those lanes, it takes a very long time. And that's because a lot of these employees are being trained and transitioned into new roles. And some of them through natural, just attrition and retirement are starting to retire, and those positions are being sunsetted. The reality is there are a lot of classifications like that will be obsolete. How do you make change happen? And it calls for extensive discussions with the unions. It's a critical part of every transportation industry. If you begin to gain sort of an understanding of the minds, an understanding of how to change career paths of people who enjoy what they do, then the discussion can at least gain some traction. And that's what you're seeing in the industry today. And this also applied with New Jersey Turnpike or North Carolina. There are a lot of transportation agencies that are struggling because it calls for collaboration, relationship, and understanding on both parts of management.
Thanks.
Various unions that oversees these classifications.
Thanks, Sylvester. Okay, if we don't have any other clarifying questions, let me, Mr. McAllister. See, it's not just you, Howard.
Howard and I are a tag team. Going to Inez's question about the light rail and that there's the infrastructure about putting in the embeddedness, but would that in the long run be a cheaper, more efficient system down the road because than what we're doing now? And that if we did want to do extensions on particular light rail, would it be better to go that route? Because Chris said we don't want to be the last to be adopting an old technology.
So going to an embedded track system has its advantages and it has its disadvantages. So when you're dealing with an embedded track, of course, all of your infrastructure is underground and it's buried by the concrete. So it does have more maintenance. You have to do more ultrasonic testing to ensure that everything underground is working accordingly. When you're dealing with the overhead line, of course, you have the restringing and making sure that the catenary is maintaining its strength and integrity. You have your switches that are above. So there is a balance. But what you do get with embedded track systems is you get a little bit more flexibility to be able to run a bus on the same pathway as you do your rail line. So that's the trade-offs and some of the things that you need to consider when you're looking at whether or not you're going to have rail that's above or one that's below.
Okay.
Any difference on these?
Okay, well, we're not getting into the technical details. I'm gonna pull you back. Okay, I think we've all earned a break, but before we get the break, okay, very short, quick answers, okay? So the prompt on the screen says, what project or corridor would you want to apply one of these innovations to? So I just want to, this is a test of when you start hearing these things, how did it start translating in your mind to a particular corridor or particular project? So, go. Chappie, you're first. I saw your finger go to the mic.
Stevens Creek corridor would be the ideal location or project to innovate and test out, pilot some of these new technologies. It's an opportunity to connect Dearborn to De Anza.
I heard a ditto from somebody over there. Okay, from our chair. Mr. McAllister.
I'm thinking of the SR 85 transit lane would be one great area, and I had two, and also to reconfigure light rail going from either from Mountain View down to Alum Rock and look at new technology there instead of investing into those.
My first thought was either Stevens Creek or El Camino. Some of those difficult but busy, or difficult in terms of we don't really have transit lanes and it's going to be slow and congested. How do we put something in that's quicker and get more people to ride through sort of those areas?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're going to hate my answer. I think it's the wrong question. You're talking about here's some technology, where can we go ahead and use it? We haven't talked at all about what the requirements are or success criteria or anything else like that. I think we're going down the wrong path with that.
Okay.
Independent of the criteria and all of that, I think there's a couple of places. Stevens Creek, I think, would be a great area to innovate. And I think, and that's a certain class of innovation. And I think the other one, more clean slatey, is the 85 corridor. So it depends on what technology and what criteria, but I think those are two prime places where you have the flexibility.
Ms. Davis.
Yes, I agree with the Stevens Creek corridor. Diridon desperately needs to be connected to the west part of our county. But I would also say on the east side of San Jose, and I'm sure Magdalena Carrasco was going to probably say the same thing, is we have light rail extension, right? We have light rail right-of-way that we haven't built light rail on. Why not innovate there?
Magdalena? Oh, no. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out. Mr. Perales, it's your turn.
Yeah, I was thinking the east side as well with the opportunities of the light rail extension. Certainly, I think an opportunity there. I think also just in our current bus system, obviously, I mean, as well, right? I mean, these are, it's not necessarily, I guess, new areas. And I don't know if we're going to have an opportunity to kind of dive further, I'm believing, right after this, to kind of dig deeper into some of the other issues. So
yes,
maybe I'll save my comments for
yes, we will dig in. We will dig in. Anybody else? Okay, so here's the thing. We're going to take a, sorry.
Well, it's already been mentioned, but I'm just going to say that on the east side, because we have such a density of population there and folks that really need transportation, it's not just the light rail extension, but we have the hub, which is at Eastridge, which transports folks throughout the entire county. There's much opportunity to innovate. And then, of course, we have Alum Rock, and you'll hear me talk about Alum Rock over and over and over. I think that there is a great deal of opportunity there to look at it again in a whole different way. I'm not going to dig up that street again, but I think that, and I'm not putting in those lights again. But I think that there's a way of looking at it all over again and seeing what can we do to improve the lives of folks on Alum Rock.
Great. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take a 10-minute break. Okay. And then we will start promptly in 10 minutes. And this is, again, we're going to now move into, I'm going to put some prompts up there. It may still not satisfy Mr. Hendricks, but this is where we're going to start kind of talking about what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, et cetera. We're not problem solving today, so keep that in mind. With that, 10-minute break, so we will resume at 10:52.
Okay, so we're going to reconvene. I'll pass it back to Jeannie.
Okay. So, as I promised, this is going to get to the exciting things, but I'm going to say a few things first, okay? So, let's, we were introduced to this slide, and as Chris tried to explain to all of us who might not be familiar with this, it really is about kind of where we are on this curve. And even though Chris was using it in part of the presentation about other industries, and he talked about, you know, Sears, for example, it also applies, obviously, to transportation, to the transit agencies all around the United States, okay? We all have to be able to look at this. And so as we're going up this, again, the dotted line coming down is if we don't get ahead of the curve, we will get into a downward dying trajectory, right? So we need to think about this. This is what I want to make sure. Think about this. Think about the zone that we're in where that kind of, where the two come together like this. That's the area that causes the uncertainty. It causes a lot of doubt, okay? Can we survive? What's going to happen? How do we do this? And sometimes that uncertainty can cause us all to get back into our comfort zones. I'm going to keep pushing you outside of your comfort zones, okay? So think ahead. Don't think of the barriers. Think about what the opportunities are. We will try and capture, whether we're capturing them up here on the flip charts in real time or whether it's being captured at somebody's keyboard. You know, we will try and identify. If it's a challenge, then we'll identify it as a challenge, or, okay, as we move forward. So now let's move to the next one. Now we started with an opening question and where we all got to use words in terms of how we saw transportation. So I want to ground you back to that. So if you look at this, what you see is a lot of opportunity here, a lot of things that we need to change if we're going to be innovating and moving us forward. So don't lose sight of that first conversation, your first engagement, okay? Because that hopefully helps us understand there's a lot of opportunity. Remember, frustrating, 1985, everything's still the same. It's congested. So hopefully everybody saw their words up here. Okay, now, can you go to the Bombardier slide real quick? So I'm going to use this as an example before we go into this discussion where, again, out of the box, okay? This is my way of encouraging us to think about this. I don't know if you guys noticed, at first glance when you look at this slide, you kind of sit there, and particularly because Chris happened to have put it in the light rail discussion, and you kind of sit here and think, oh, those are two light rail cars sitting side by side. Wrong answer. Again, one of them on the right is a light rail, okay? It's a fixed rail system, and again, the other one is a rubber tire. And so this, again, helps us to understand we don't need to necessarily think in today's paradigm. This is something that shows how today's paradigm of light, where we do have a fixed rail and we have a flexible rubber tire, they can coexist, but it also should get us thinking about, do we need both of them as we're going forward? How does that set us up for the future and flexibility? Okay, now we're going to go to my next, one more prompt. This is to help me gauge where we are and for you to see where our peers are. And I'm going to give you three choices, and we're going to do a show of hands, okay? So you're familiar as board members of what we're doing now, how we're spending our capital dollars, what we're looking down the road on. So the question is, do you believe we should stay the course? The course that we're on is a good course. Let's stay there. Do you think we need to tweak the course that we're on? Or do you think we need to really do some radical change to the course? Okay, so in the context of everything you've seen. So, show of hands. How many of you feel like we should stay the course? Didn't think so, particularly after that first slide. Okay. How many of you think that really it's about tweaking, or using Glenn's term, evolving the course that we're on? And how many people think we really need to make a radical change in terms of the course? Seems overwhelming here, okay? So now, as we're doing that, because we're talking about radical, as we go into the next set of questions here, I'm going to have this be more free flow. So go ahead and move to the next slide. More free flow. But I'm going to ask that you guys, I will stop you. I will stop board members. If you want to raise something, we'll capture it as an issue, as a challenge, okay? But what we're not going to do is we're not going to, staff has already been told, they're not going to respond to any questions. Right now, this is not about, it's questions amongst ourselves, but not directed at staff in terms of trying to find an answer, okay? And they will only answer a question if I direct them to. This is where I get to break all the rules, where no board member has any single power, but I do because I'm a facilitator, I'm not a board member. Okay? So with that, so now, looking at this particular slide here, let's keep in mind that when we talk about VTA in our mission statement, we say it's solutions that move you. And we talk about our vision statement, it's innovate the way Silicon Valley moves, okay? So the question with all of this, and to set our stage for how we're going to put together a roadmap going forward, where do we go from here? We said you want radical change. So what are we doing? That, and you know what, we're not limited to these questions here, okay? But what are we doing that we should continue to do, or maybe accelerate something that we're already doing, you know? Such as, I'll give an example, such as signal prioritization. That's something that we could probably control. We may look at saying, hey, we really need to accelerate that as a stopgap measure until we get to maybe where we're really going to be going to. What are we doing that we should rethink or discontinue? And what aren't we doing that we should be doing? Okay. So now I'm just going to open it up. We're going to try and capture things over here on the flip chart. Okay, this is a discussion amongst ourselves. So turn inwardly, look across, and let's start having a conversation. And I will guide when necessary. Okay, Mr. Rennie, you want to go first?
Yes, please. So the first thing that comes to mind is I almost would have liked on this slide, what are the problems we're trying to solve? You know, Glenn, I think, started alluding to this when he was talking, about, we're trying to choose what technology or what quarter we wanted to do. What is the, I want to make sure we're all aligned for what are the problems we're trying to solve. You know, a fancy new technology will sell itself just because it's fancy and new in technology, but we need to make sure that we're solving the problem. I'd almost rather us say, hey, look, we've got these 4 problems, we just solved them. Oh, by the way, here's the technology we did it with, versus here's this wonderful technology, now we're trying to figure out what we solved with it. My first thoughts.
I'm going to try and keep my light on. So, what problems are we trying to solve?
So I think we're trying to solve getting, it was the 2 that I said that were kind of opposing each other. It's transportation for those that don't have really other choices, let's call them the needy, the underserved, whatever. And then there's the congestion management solving. That's getting more people out of their cars and getting them to work or wherever they need to go. I think those are the 2 things that has been sort of our mission for a long time. It doesn't say that as part of our mission, but I think that's what our mission really is. Then what's the next level down? How do we solve those? And I had mentioned, I think there's stigmas about riding buses. It's not. Right now, it's still more convenient to drive your car. As much as we complain about the traffic, it's still, in most cases, more convenient to drive your car. So I think that's part of what we want to solve is either convenience or the experience or something is better than driving the car. Those are the first things come to mind.
Okay. So who wants to react? Are those the 2 problems we need to solve? You know what? Let's see if we can do this with more of a free flow rather than me calling on people. So, Mr. Hendricks, you want to go next? But again, let's see if we can do it as a free flow conversation. And then whoever wants to chime in after Mr. Hendricks, go.
Conceptually, I agree with you, except for not. You're describing the problem in the context of what we existingly have. I think when we describe the problems, it should be more at a macro level. Here, we're trying to get people around more effectively. It shouldn't matter what the existing technology is. It needs to be a cost-effective model for both the provider and the user. It needs to, be able to define some metrics of how to do it. So conceptually, I think you were in the right concept, but I don't think stating the problems when we just look at our existing infrastructure is the right way, because that limits us on what the future solutions could look like, and to what you were saying for me, defining the real requirement of what you're trying to solve. Because I think one of our big problems you didn't mention was we have a business model problem for how it's all paid for.
I don't disagree.
Right. So
Jump in. Come on. Howard, go ahead. Jump in.
I'll jump in.
Good. Happy.
Maybe I'll try to, Rob, try to summarize what you were trying to say. I just wrote down, based on what you said, is to move people in an economically, environmentally, and fiscally sustainable way. Tries to capture what you were trying to say. Hopefully it does.
Repeat your words again.
Move people in an economically, environmentally, and fiscally sustainable way is the problem that we're trying to solve.
And it may not be a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly.
But
I think economically speaks to that efficiency.
Call it efficiency instead of economic. But I got to point out just a couple minor things, right? 1.9 million daily trips between zones within our county. We got that out of the 85 thing. We're not carrying anywhere near that order of people. It's not. We have two hats we have to wear. One is we're running a transportation system that serves a very small segment of the population. I mean, the reality is the percentage of people we carry is really small. There's solutions and stuff we have in that space. And the other one is we're a congestion management agency, and that's where the other 90% of people are moving. And so what I don't want to lose track of is, let's do all these things to optimize. I'm just going to pick randomly buses or something, right? That's serving less than 10% of the population. Even in our most outrageously wild fantasies about ridership numbers, it's serving less than 10% of our population. So we need to come up with solutions that cover all the different factors. And somebody said get them out of cars. I'm not sure that that is actually should be one of our goals given where technology's going, right? We should be facilitating modern cars, smart cars that can move much, much more efficiently through our corridors. So it seems like we could be making trade-offs that facilitate our transportation models, our buses and whatever we're using, but also facilitate transportation as a service in private, and private is the wrong word, but transportation as a service in publicly owned or corporation-owned transportation personal fleets and private vehicles. I think all of those things are what we have to be trying to prepare for. If we're trying to optimize how to get more people out of their cars into buses, I got to just say we're still living in 1985.
Right, and that's why I didn't specifically define the mode of transportation.
No, I thought yours was pretty good, but I just wanted to make it clear that I think there's our 10% job, which is we got to figure out a public transportation system, and then the other 90% we got to figure out congestion management, which is private vehicles that probably kind of transform themselves into these corporation-owned service vehicles.
Well, I think to that point, I think we need to consider whether or not we want to try to capture some of that market share. So maybe 10% of the population are riding VTA buses, but there's a much greater proportion of people riding private buses these days because they go across boundaries.
But
right?
I added
want to get into that business, and or when we have dedicated bus lanes so that buses can go faster because of the congestion management issue, do we want to let private buses use those lanes?
I would
and
hope
at what cost?
Some of those questions.
Dedicated transportation lanes.
Yeah, and they could be buses, they could be autonomous vehicles, they could be our buses, they could be corporate buses. I'm super with that. And I got to point out one process thing, Jeannie, that always throws me off. And this is a strength of a strong engineering organization and a weakness. We have no problem turning over every rock, even if we know it's dumb. And that takes a long time to investigate every possible answer. And so I want to throw fuel out just as an example. We've talked about diesel, we've talked about biodiesel, we've talked about carbon neutral diesel, we talk about hydrogen. You know, we talked about natural gas. I think of all the fuel investigations that we've done, but I think like at this point, it's pretty clear that the fuel is electric. So hopefully we're not going to do any more investigations on 47 different ways for fuel. And I am wondering, when we talk about some of the other solution spaces, if we're kind of doing the same thing. You know, how much more do we need to keep talking about light rail when we all know the constraints and costs, and that there are many more flexible options out there than our existing light rail system? So I'm wondering if there is a way, innovatively process-wise, we could change the way we address our problems, rather than having to turn over every stone for 2 years to narrow it down to the top 3 stones so that we can go another 2 years. Oh, and I should point out, with different board members, I don't want to talk about governance at this point, but if we're going to innovate, we've got to change the way that we think, the way that we make decisions, and the processes we go through to come to answers. I get the value of it. I don't have a great answer, but I know what we're doing doesn't lead to quick-moving organizations. And honestly, I'm so tired of talking about fuels. Let's just say everything from now on is going to be electric.
I think part of what, you know, our mission is to move people. I think it should be to move people, solutions that don't suck for moving me, basically, right? If I think about, I live in Los Gatos, if I took a job in Menlo Park, I don't have an option that doesn't suck. And Chappie really, you know, summed it up nicely. Doesn't suck means it's environmentally sustainable. It doesn't cost me a fortune in money or time, right? So give me an option that doesn't suck, or give me multiple options that don't suck.
I just want to add on to where Howard was going. An area, I guess it would be the first question, what are we doing that we should continue to do or to accelerate? It's a culture change. You know, I've had the opportunity to work with several members of VTA staff, very intelligent, very smart, very innovative, very out-of-the-box thinking. I think being part of a bureaucracy like VTA stifles that innovation, stifles that out-of-the-box thinking. So there needs to be an acceleration of the culture that allows staff to have the freedom to innovate, propose innovative out-of-the-box ideas, and also feel comfortable in terms of even being able to fail. Because there's definitely, I feel that there's a fear of failure in the organization. And if you're afraid to fail, then you're not going to be able to innovate.
Well, and Chappie, in terms of like creating a culture of innovation, like one of the other things that I do for my city is we have a municipally owned electric utility, and we're part of various joint action agencies I spend a lot of time on. And one of the things that's, if you look at the rate of change and Howard was talking about electricity, so I'm going to be spending next week in Washington, D.C. on a lot of electricity stuff. So part of what is force that change and change the culture, and I still see it because we talk about, oh my God, we're going to have billions of dollars of stranded investments in natural gas plants, is the fact that our government or the legislature, different things, are saying, here's where you have to be. You have to be at this point by this year. So it's like, okay, game changer. We can't keep burning coal. You know, Santa Clara dumped a coal burning plant in New Mexico, shut it down. I mean, we didn't even try to sell it or whatever. Right thing to do, take it out, and we're absorbing that cost. And so what we may have to do as a board, or whether the state legislature, is to lay down very strict parameters and say, this is what we envision, this is what we have to do, because oftentimes that rate of innovation is somewhat forced by, okay, we've got an environment that we have to do that. I mean, just in the time that I've been involved with the electric utilities, and all the ones that I mostly deal with are publicly owned. And in just a few years, the change of thinking that I've even seen from the Midwest states in terms of recognizing we can't keep doing coal. And so, I mean, we may need a similar paradigm here to define and say we have only a limited amount of time before we lose our public, before we lose our financing, whatever it is, to have that innovation spring forward. But I think sometimes there has to be some pressure or parameters, and say, okay, guys, and that's some of what happened in the electric industry. Okay, you guys go figure. Okay, we're telling you, come back to us and tell us what we need to do. And part of it for Santa Clara was absorb 8 years of bond payments that you're not going to be, and commit. And we're doing that. So
I would just say, I think there's two sides to the equation, and what you're talking about is, you might need regulation to kind of drive the providers, but this culture change really, I think, has to be driven from the consumer side. You can take a look at what we've done electricity-wide across the county with Silicon Valley Clean Energy and things like that. That's because the public demanded those things. That's why the cities went ahead and started that stuff, is because the public wanted it. And public, on one hand, they say here we want public transportation, and about their comment stops right there because they're not willing to necessarily use it. We can say all the reasons why it's got this problem or that problem, but they don't go out and use it. And you've got to have something that the public is going to be there with, because you can't regulate somebody to say you're going to use a certain particular transportation model.
You say they're
but
not
look at
using
BART
it.
and Caltrain.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, Caltrain, there's 65,000 riders every day. You say they're not using it. They're using it if it fits their needs.
There's 65,000 riders, but
That's
there's
correct.
1.9 million trips within our own county in that same day.
And when Caltrain electrifies and can expand service, it will.
And they double
it's
it,
growing every year.
and they double it to 120 in 30 years, which is the projections with electrification. We're going to have more than 1.9 million trips just within the county. It still represents an exceptionally small percentage of the people who are moving around. BART's 447 is their biggest day. You know how many trips are made within the Bay Area counties every day? Tens of millions. And they're 447, and we hold that up. Again, these are successful things that we have, but we can't lose sight of the fact that they represent single-digit percentages of those who have to move around our valley every day.
And I want to say, there are those good examples, but again, it goes back to my very first comments. I talked about pipes versus first and last mile. And that's why more people don't use those services, because you can't get there. I mean, Caltrain wants to electrify. I still don't know how all those new users from 3 or 4 miles away from a station are going to get there.
It's
That's
standing
where we
room only right now on
I understand.
commuter
Yeah.
trains,
But
so they're
but
already there.
So that's the same answer like you're saying. So that's partially, that's where VTA probably has the chance to make a contribution, is how do we get people there rather than, and maybe it's going to be, it's not maybe all going to be VTA, but is it going to be fleets of autonomous vehicles that are dropping, because we're certainly not going to have people parking more cars at all these train stations. I mean, we can't, we have space, 10 spaces for every car or whatever, I mean, that model's not working anymore.
I agree, and going back to here, how we look at the public that we need to bring along, we have to understand in the network area we serve, it was in one of the slides, it talked about urban, everything's becoming an urban area. Well, there's a lot of our cities that we're trying to support that are still suburban and want to stay that way, rightly or wrongly, of what goes on. And that's where I said, what I said here, the solution or the requirement you're trying to lay out, that's good, but it's not going to be, potentially not a one-size-fits-all model of how you're going to be able to provide that, which gets to, this question about, fixed track versus, having services that go by, what the pain is. We ought to be using our right-of-way so that whatever our different solutions are can fit into that same existing amount of right-of-way. When you put a fixed rail in, then that's the only kind of thing you can go ahead and use it. So getting back to requirements, we need to go ahead and have, not exactly the right words, but whatever right-of-way that we have, that we implement it in such a way that all of our services could potentially use it and share it, as opposed to things being segmented out.
So just to add to my perspective, I think, in going down the list here, and it shares in some of the comments people have made, I think in regards to what we should continue to do, or accelerate, but more specifically continue to do, I think it's maintain that focus in serving those that really have no other options. As Director Rennie was saying, it's not stated in our sort of what we're looking at up here in our mission, but we know that is part of it, is obviously serving a contingent of the public with public transportation that may not necessarily have another option, whether it's mobility issues, through like our paratransit service, or just individuals that don't have their own vehicles. So I think that's something that we need to maintain. I think rethinking, I think two things came to my mind immediately. One was light rail, and the other was also the governance structure, which fortunately we're having discussions around that. And I think that what we're not doing that we should be, and this kind of goes to what Director Hendricks was just saying, we're not utilizing our public assets, our public infrastructure that we own. We're not utilizing to their fullest potential at all. If you look and go around just the light rail corridor, for instance, the amount of times that the corridor is actually empty or unutilized, right? In between when trains are moving on it, you can sit on 87 in congested traffic and only see a couple trains go by. And so we have this public asset, this huge asset of infrastructure that's just really kind of going not completely untapped, but very seldomly used. And that could be similar throughout the corridor. And you look at areas through downtown or at intersections that are already, I guess it's embedded, I don't know if that's what it's called, but or maybe if that's not, but it's essentially paved over, right? So it's not traditional rail ties. And even in areas where we already have that, we'll have a bus stop and a bus using a regular traffic lane and not necessarily use a light rail lane, which it could be, even today, right? Without even making any kind of infrastructure change, but to what Director Hendricks was saying, could or should the whole system be that way, where we're combining the abilities of our different modes of transportation rather than saying, this is a light rail line and only light rail can use it, and that's it, right? And again, then we kind of stick to having this asset and not utilizing it to its full potential.
Okay. Well, Glenn, what do you agree with?
It's really, again, how do you go ahead and it's the right-of-way and the surface that we have to go ahead and operate on. The video that we showed where here you've got two of their convoys that come along and then they share something together, that's an example of being able to use this stuff, because it could be, what we traditionally think of a bus combining with a light rail coming together. That's what I'm agreeing is we have to rethink how we use the surface and the right-of-way that we have. And, because you want to be able to get as many of the appropriate and controlled, and automation lets you maybe manage how you share that, resource better now, because you can control and understand, I know. But I think that's one of the big things that's against why people were against BRT. But it's a dedicated lane, but a bus only comes by every so often. Well, if you could share that with something else, share it with something else, and control, and now if you have smart city, technology around the city so it knows where another device is, here, I'm going to speed up so I can get in, I'm going to slow down so I'll be able to fit. That's where the automation technology piece lets you manage the resource better. I mean, to a certain extent, our communication network is, like what is the paths and circuits in a computer, right? How do you control the usage of what those are to optimize it?
Right.
The master control brain, it goes ahead and can control what resource can go where. I'm going to slow you down so you go faster later or whatever.
Well, let me push you guys a little bit on the subject of right-of-way for a second, because when I'm hearing us talk about right-of-way, and maybe I'm not listening carefully enough, But we're talking about right-of-way that we already own, such as the light rail, et cetera. So let me get you away from that for a second and also look at, but do we have control of enough right-of-way? Do we need to actually control more right-of-way? And Glenn, used the example of like the bus, and we sit here, if we leave it up to how we operate today, okay, that is a land use decision that is solely in the hands of local jurisdictions, and that puts, from a transportation point of view, at other people's mercy, right?
Or it's owned by Caltrans.
Well, that's El Camino, but you have Stevens Creek, but
we have the medians too. You guys showed a picture of a train in China that was a train that followed dotted lines on asphalt, and look at the picture carefully. It's actually in the median.
Yes, but my point is, when we look at this, when we think about future, do we see something that has to give, or how do we get in terms of use of some of this right-of-way? Because whether it is in the center, whether it's on the side, and I will speak from El Camino Real, because our experience is, it's pushback, it's pushback, it's pushback. These things that we saw today all involve having something that is tuned to and can evolve, but it's tuned to some sort of transit type solutions, et cetera. Are there other things that we need to do there? So again, I will just ask that and leave it. Cindy, you want to go on? We haven't heard from Cindy.
We're all surprised. Yes. So first of all, I just wanted to say how exciting I think this discussion is. And just to say, some of what you're saying, I feel like my ears were just really like, yay, we're going in a different direction. But let me start first with the issue of assets and asset management. I think that the public entities in general do not think about public assets in very strategic ways. And there are exceptions around the table to cities that have done that. And actually, Santa Clara is one that went into the electricity business early. They didn't sell land, so they had, the ability to make money over a long period of time on their land. And frankly, while we disputed this in court, we had a debate over redevelopment. It was also that they pushed the envelope in ways that legal or not, just kidding, that really did, frankly, create a much more stable source of income and gave them the ability to invest in better public assets, I would argue, than some other cities. So I say that because I do think that in some ways this debate around assets is, the first thing is determining that we're going to keep them. And then the second thing is determining what their value add is today. So some of that is in the guideways that we've discussed at length. Some of it is in the expressways, frankly, that the county owns. Some of it is in roadways that if we're going to maintain them, that we might decide in the future that maintaining a roadway and taking liability for the risk of the maintenance of that, if someone should sue us, means that if we're investing a certain amount of money, that VTA wants to own it. And why is that important? Because long term, we're not going to be able to get any money from gas taxes, because we're going to be out of the gas tax business. And what that means is that there's going to be different ways of tracking where vehicles go and how we acquire income from them. So, for example, I'm going to use something that has nothing to do with us right now, but I've been really concerned about the amount of money that we need to set aside to do grade SEPs for Caltrain. And while we were going through the Measure B process, I cannot tell you how unhappy I was that we were taking such a big chunk of the money for the ballot measure for grade SEPs. And not because I don't think there's something we have to figure out how to do, but because to me it was a not strategic use of resources. This is before we knew high-speed rail was going to be going away. Well, we'll talk more about that. But here's my point. My point is that at some point we may need to think about how to create JPAs or organizations that have the capacity to borrow and spend money to rebuild all those underpasses. And that's going to have to be paid back by somebody over a period of time. So what would a way to do that? Every time a car goes under, you get charged a penny. And that way it can go into that body to be able to continue to reinvest in those kinds of assets. So what we know is that public assets really are the coin of the realm today. I don't know what technology will look like in the future, but my guess is that until we are only flying, that these assets have tremendous value. And I just want to give one other example, because this has been annoying me. At the state, the cellular companies went, as you probably know, to try to create an opportunity for themselves to be able to force us to turn over our guideways and posts and light standards, because they understand that how to monetize that. So all that is to say that I think that it may require VTA to have different kinds of partnerships. VTA could go to the county and say, look, we have as many people driving on the expressways, frankly, as anybody in the universe. Let's have a conversation about whether or not we can do something with the county, whether or not we can work with certain cities. And then anyway, I have two more things that have nothing to do with this, because I've been listening to you all, and I wanted to just make 2 points about just kind of larger points. One is that you asked a question about workers. And if we had a conversation right now about governance, the first thing every single one of us would be thinking about is how to keep our butt in the seat we're in. And that we don't think the employees of this organization would think the exact same way is foolish. And so to your point, what is it that we can do to create an environment where people aren't afraid? One is that the reason working men and women get afraid of these kinds of discussions is sometimes they don't have confidence in us. Like right now, if you ask the folks who work here, they think the reason we have financial problems is because we were driving the bus with our feet. They were doing all the work, right? Really. So part of that is rebuilding that trust, but the other part of it is that often in these kinds of transitions, as we've seen with manufacturing, the jobs that become available pay less. And so people don't want to make X amount and then go make X amount. So that what we have to be able to do is have a very honest conversation about what transition would look like and how it is that these jobs are maintained in a way that working people can use them, and which, by the way, we're going to need, because for however long we're going to always be fighting to get employees, and so having an environment that people really trust is really critical. Having options that are very meaningful that their families can live off of. And the third thing is we have a model already in VTA, and that's our joint workforce investment. And I didn't say but that program was designed by the union. Actually, ATU brought this to VTA. It wasn't the other way around, and it was really intended to be able to train people who were who came in doing janitorial work or other kinds of work and letting them become bus drivers. And off of that has become this really incredible sense of pride about the work people do, and moving that up to even more challenging areas. So I actually think there's a lot of opportunity. I think it's going to be very, very painful. And I think it includes us thinking about whether or not we need to be in these seats. And frankly, I would just say, as we get mouthy or judgy about the employees, we have to just think about how we would react. Actually, there was one last thing, I'm sorry, and that is that I think that we have to be okay with assessing commercialization of each of our ideas out of the box, because doing the point I think that both Rob and Chappie raised about how, what's our goal and what are we really trying to accomplish? I think part of it is the sustainability of the institution itself has to be a core component of the work we're doing. And to remind everybody that neither Uber or Lyft are making money yet. And their grand plan to make money is to take the public sector cash that we have and private sector cash that they're getting and merge those together. And that's important to understand, because if the leading agencies in transportation right now haven't offering the service, not the cars, not the rails, that tells us that we're in some water that's going to be kind of challenging. And I think that's okay. We just need to know that. And the reason our staff doesn't, I remember what it was. You said the staff needs to be not afraid to take risk. They've been not afraid, and we've been jerks. So what I would say is that it requires, from a cultural perspective, us being able to say to the public, here are the reasons that we are making these decisions, and we recognize that this is a measured risk we're taking, or a not measured risk. But we have to be intellectually honest about it, because when we had this conversation a year ago, we had 3 board members chide the staff over a program that they obviously was going to fail. Wasn't it obvious? Well, no, it really wasn't obvious, or they wouldn't have done it. So, and they did it with our permission, like we voted on it. So anyway, so my point only is that we're going to have to be able to remind each other when we act out inappropriately.
I like that analogy of we drive the bus, the board members drive the bus with our feet dragging. It is hard, and we do that when we wear our city hats as well, and our council member roles too. Chair.
So I'm very pleased to hear the vice chair refer to the governance issues, because I think, as I said at our January meeting, I think, when I talked about Pogo, I've seen the enemy and he is us, kind of thing. So we are working on, I'm working with Mr. Lawson, and we're going to be starting, hopefully having our first meeting of our little working group to make some suggestions about how we can make the board more effective in March. And several board members have volunteered to work on that. And, once again, the change, I totally agree with you, with the change management and the fear. And like I said, I went through, most people realize I was a career Hewlett-Packard employee. So I went from the glory days to the not so glorious days. And went from big innovations to incremental change. And then I lived that sigmoid curve. And, and I saw what happened to a lot of people. Ranks were decimated, and that you can say there was efficiencies, but it also was failure to adapt or whatever. And so, but I did also see examples in that of really great processes in many different ways that did help a number of employees. Unfortunately, there were people's lives who did get impacted. And I think as a society, we're going to have to face these issues as we look at the impacts of artificial intelligence and automation and, some of the things I'm reading and listening to. So those are kind of discussions that the larger community we're going to have in terms of, you talk about in some of these sectors, millions of jobs going away. And as a society, do we really think that we're going to be able to create that many more jobs, or do we have to look at fundamentally how our society is based and how what we place value on? So that's a great discussion for around the cocktail bar someplace or whatever. So I think that we do have to. That's why I also mentioned back in January, I talked about workforce, talked about governance, because those are very, very critical. It's not going to happen. All the great visioning and anywhere you can see, some of the companies that have been mentioned, at times where they almost feel like Apple, we all forget, almost went out of business, almost disappeared from the scene, and it was because of a lot, there were some different challenges going on with their workforce and their governance. And right now, I would say that I'm not sure that Apple is still, leading on an exponential basis. Are they tweaking and doing incremental change? So and those are all the evolutions and changes of organizations that we have to find ways to, I always like to say there's very few black and whites in the world, mostly grays, and where you show your wisdom to discernment is where you can navigate through a sea of grays. So that being said, taking it back to something concrete, something we should accelerate, like I once again mentioned in January, and we've had some discussion here today. I think one thing, an initiative that we could take on to show that we want to start doing things differently, and it gets into some of the issues that Jeannie brought up about land use control and control of cities. It brings up what Cindy's referring to, because I've long thought, gosh darn, couldn't we figure out a way to run express buses more efficiently on the county expressways, is to do something like say, okay, we're going to have a county-wide initiative, because as Glenn was saying about the numbers of trips in Howard and the fractions, well, we even have millions of people coming in from outside of the county, and looking at the whole range from BART down to Caltrain to light rail to whatever. But we do have most of our population still in cars. So to say, okay, and whether I've said, let's go to some of those, our favorite billionaires, and say, we need you to help fund a trust fund here we want to have a county-wide signal project. And here, if we've got the town of Saratoga going off and spending money on a system where they don't know whether it's going to interact, and I read something about that every city or entity is going to be kind of like coming up with something that's listing the properties of their systems. And I think back to my days, APIs, application programming interfaces, with your SDK, your software development kit, like if that's what we're talking about doing, like, whoa, wait, why talk about how we're going to interface these things? Why don't we say right now, okay, Silicon Valley Leadership Group and whatever San Jose Chamber of Commerce is calling themselves now. I usually call them the Illuminati, but to say in a loving way, to say we are going to have one system of whether it's going to be controlling buses, light rail, expressways, El Camino, Stevens Creek, whatever. I mean, to me, if we could just take that and say, well,
and let's do it with not studying for 2 years whether we should be doing it, because we already know we should be coordinating signalization, priority for transit, and public safety.
Right.
Is there going to be any issue? So
Equivalent, basically.
yes, can we skip those first 2 years and say, let's do this?
Well, I'm just saying, in the whole range of all these issues we face, but if we took something concrete like that would impact every jurisdiction in this county and help VTA and help those cars and say, okay, everybody, I said, get on board and let's find a way to make this happen, and and accelerate it, and that's the signal to the population. We're going to start doing things differently.
Okay. Let me just say one thing. We actually, when we talk about the enemy being us, every city around here has been painful to deal with, and the county too. So, and I'm just going to use the signalization. We've been working on that for years and years and years. The small cities say we don't have money. The big cities say move your butts faster. Some people have the new equipment, so they don't want to trade it out. I just think we, in some respects, you guys, I think we have to take a coalition of the willing and to get other people on board, because I think if we try to do it the other way, we're going to have a 4-year meeting about it. And it sounds bad because it sounds like we're going to leave some people behind, and the fact is we will, and then they're going to want to catch up. Because I worry that we are persuading that it's like the 2/3 vote, like persuading 30% that we should move is like.
I get the public process part of it, I really do, but I will just give you right off the bat, if you guys want to start doing signalization, my city volunteers. It doesn't help anything. That's the problem.
Howard. I say you put him in a headlock right here. Do it.
And just, again, one of the smallest cities, right? Both economically, employment center. We offered a year ago to be the pilot program for shuttle transit, right? Passed a policy. I stated at the board. You've got another letter within the last week from the campus president reaffirming our position that West Valley College could be used as a pilot. I'll give you us for signals. We're in the middle of doing our signal stuff right now. Again, it's a coalition of the willing. I know that we're not the only city that's worried about the signalization stuff. We don't solve the grand problem. If San Jose wanted to be involved and your staff was directed to help come up with a regional standard, if the county, who's now walked out of the room, was going to be involved, that could be a start. We gotta figure out how to move rather than spend the rest of our lives getting everybody to agree on something.
I've been quiet listening and appreciating everybody, what people are saying. And so what I observe, and I've been trying to advocate for a while, is things that we need to advocate, stop thinking. I tried to stay away from governance because I thought we were doing innovation. But we have to take political decisions out of making sound decisions for what we do for VTA. I mean, we can't take money that was, we need to be able to have the political courage to measure money that was decided 10 years, 20 years ago and put it into new innovation. And that will help, maybe that could fund our signalization, that could fund what we're trying to do. But we got to have the political will to say, something that we're doing, as it was mentioned, don't invest, be the last to invest in old technology. We need to take that approach. We also need to be, if we're going to be innovative, I was in a meeting a year ago that said, hey, we're going to look at signalization. Has anything happened out of that? No, but we need to put a budget. We need to put our money where our mouth is and give the staff the ability to have a budget so where they can fill, they can be innovative, they can come up with new ideas. I mean, instead of saying, well, here's a deal, let's work on it, let them come along and give us those ideas and say, try them here, get a test pilot, test the area. And it has to be a sizable budget, and it has to be a sustainable budget so that it doesn't go year one or two. I mean, it has to be a long-term budget so they can build the confidence, they can build the staff. And if we want our VTA to be the leader and be the solutions, we need our staff. And I go along with Chappie about it. He was saying this staff is very intelligent, they're like a racehorse that we're keeping them in the gate because they're ready to go, but they have to do what we politically think is the right direction. And I think that's what we need to give them to continue to do. Start going out that way.
On an R&D budget at VTA.
Huh?
An R&D budget.
That's
at
right.
VTA.
And I mentioned, that's when I say the general manager innovation and R&D, but I think that's what we need. And signalization seems to be the one that can cross all borders. You were talking about you're doing something for your city. I've been trying to, Mountain Views, we're going to have our goal setting next week, and I'm going to that we want to be a smart transportation city, and that means signalization, that means fiber in the ground, that means we can connect to Santa Clara and so forth. So, our light rail is a continuous from Alum Rock to Mountain View. If we can get that to work much faster, tying into BART, we need that. People don't take BART, light rail, because it's so slow. Here's a statistic, I brought it up a couple of months, maybe last year. 4% of the population was using VTA in 2008. It's 4% now. And we haven't we haven't done anything to get people out of their cars. And so, yes, we need to protect those who can't drive their cars, and I think the day-to-day operations are doing that. But I look at 280, I look at 101, I look at 237, and there's thousands of people sitting in their cars, and I know they may go from one point to one point, but it's not the continuum that we're looking for. But there's an audience there. And when we're saying, should we take a risk? I just read a study yesterday where it's saying, well, yeah, if we take an express bus and it gets here at Deadheads and we don't know what to do with it, well, that's our solution is, okay, we can get that express bus to go to point A, and then we need to find the solution of how we can optimize that asset that's sitting there going back. Because if that's all we're going to do, we're always not going to be able to handle the rush hour traffic. We need that there's solutions, and yet there's a risk. So we need to say now, yes, we want to take that opportunity and find the solution instead of going, well, no, the data says, no, this isn't the right way to go. And if we are going to be, what was the phrase, radically change the course, then yes, we need to be radically take ideas and push the envelope.
Go ahead. I just want to go ahead and get this out because this is the part I was holding that I wanted to get out here before we go to public comments. So first off, and I'm going to be totally buzzword compliant here, go electric. Go ahead and define the requirements of how we want to go ahead and do stuff and translate those requirements into a business model and a governance model that will let us go ahead and implement them. That's what, we can talk about. I've sat in lots of business development meetings and heard lots of ideas to go ahead and do things. And unless you can translate them into a business model of something with a governance model that, is going to deal with all this cross, entity, piece, that's going to, if we can't do requirements to business model, then all this is not going to get us somewhere. That's what, and if we need help doing that, go find a person that does VC stuff. Because that's what they do, is they take ideas and business requirements and get them into business models, because then you'll decide whether or not you can get investment for it.
Okay.
So I wanted to add, this would be
Raul, and then who has their light on over there? Okay, go ahead, Raul.
So this is more of kind of this is not the major kind of re-envisioning, but it's kind of the sort of, I guess, outside the components of technology or innovation as we traditionally think of it. And I think Director Rennie had mentioned other ways to innovate. And one that came to my mind in regards to operations was something similar to what Uber and Lyft drivers did. So certainly their technology was the major innovation, right? But they also added a component to get a one-up over the taxi drivers. They added gum, water, and cell phone chargers in their cars as almost like a standard right now if you take a Uber or Lyft. They just kind of added that in. The drivers doing that on their own. There wasn't a requirement of the companies. They added a customer service component that you didn't find in a taxi. And that little added sort of cherry on top, it's innovative. It seems simple, right? But it's innovative. And I think if you consider our systems, right, like in the addition of Wi-Fi, right, this sort of came slowly and doesn't work extremely well. But beyond that, what other components are we sort of lacking as the, again, this isn't the big vision, but it's what other components can we do that maybe could even be done now as lower hanging fruit while we're going through some of this major change to look at that customer service innovation and and I don't necessarily have the solutions to it, but I heard an interesting one come up, which was the automated buses that are able to recognize a passenger that speaks a different language, and then it can automatically speak to it. Well, technologies like that could be incorporated into our buses now, where you have that extra added customer service component. And so I just think that's another area of innovation that we should consider.
Okay, so I have somebody else who wants to speak right now. So real quick, I was trying to do a time check here. We said that we were going to go until 12 o'clock. And there's a couple of things we still need to do, open up to public comments and such. But before I even do that, one of the things I really want to understand, this has been a great discussion, okay? This is, I think, Cindy, you always use it, it's like spitballing. We've been doing a lot of spitballing here. And then the thing is, how do we get to what are some of the next steps? What do we want to do? And how, as a board, do we want to continue to try and figure out, I would call it a roadmap going forward. I don't want to do this analysis paralysis. I don't want all of that, but trying to figure out, what are like the big things that we want to do. And so I'd like to see if anybody has ideas or things that they want to get out on that. For me, so if I look at me personally, not me in my facilitator role, and I look at what I heard in terms of, like problem statement, et cetera, and when I looked at problem statement, the things I captured down was, transportation that is economically, environmentally, and fiscally sustainable. It delivers transit that is faster, frequent, and reliable. It is. It also incorporates the private vehicles, and that's movement maybe toward where instead of private vehicles, we're still in vehicles, but maybe they're more the shared vehicle. It's focusing on customer experience and trying to understand the transportation that doesn't suck, I think was the quote. And so and then I heard, like solving this whole dedicated transportation lens. For me, there's three things that automatically boil up where if I sat there and said, what takeaway do I want? Where do I want to start putting energy or staff resources on? One is dealing first with the customer experience and looking at refreshing our market segmentation. Relook at that. What is the market segmentation? And then looking at it in the here and now, the low-hanging fruit that I've heard, like Raul mentioned, all the way to what are the real innovative things, so with a longer view. I also sit there and I look at this and say, if we ever want to get to this thing we keep talking about, faster, frequent, more reliable, I think we need to rethink the right-of-way and what are the requirements that we need in order to do this, because all the examples that we saw today, okay, it's not just about a new vehicle, it is what that vehicle is operating on in terms of what is that right-of-way, because all of these, even if you look at our neighbor to the north in San Francisco, they have this right-of-way. There's red lanes, which are just for transit to try and move things faster. But how do we rethink a right-of-way? What do we need to do there? And I think we need to get out of our boxes and do what BART did. Okay, they got legislation that enabled them to look at how they approach TOD. Maybe, I think anything's on the table. Do we need to look at
that differently. And then the third one I put on there is the commercialization. I think part of us in terms of sustainability and such is trying to look at that commercialization, which is what Cindy kind of introduced into this conversation. Those would be my big three in terms of trying to say, hey, so what do you have on your big three? And Chair, I'm going to start with you. Do you have a big three?
Well, I mentioned, I think that we should look at the what it would take to put together an initiative for synchronized signals throughout the county. I mean that, and you know the one of the things. Well, we've got so many ideas. I think that part of what's happened today is that we probably should have been having these conversations for many years, and I think this is the first conversation like this. At least, I mean, I've had some of these kind of conversations like in one-offs with individual board members, but not, collectively. So I think for myself and hopefully with the vice chair and our staff to figure out a plan based on what we've heard here today of, how do we kind of put this into a cohesive package and look at, we just did a strategic plan last year. Look at how does this fit within that strategic plan, or where do we need to, make changes and really come up with some kind of, at least even from what we've all talked about today, some sort of work plan that we bring back to the board and because there's a lot here that we're talking about, and whether we take projects and give them to some of the standing committees, or whether we come up with some other working groups and get the public involved in the other sectors. So other than that, I mean, I am very interested in looking at some alternatives before, once we get the data, all the data that we have gone out to get about the proposed light rail extensions, how can we do something different than what you always do, what you always done, you always get what you always gotten. So did anybody else want to?
I have one small thing that I want to just mention.
And yeah, go ahead.
And is, in terms of the top three, I'll just give you the one. I just think that we need to analyze, redefine how we make decisions. I think that our decision-making processes are a major impediment, and it's board governance, it's the way we do direct staff, it's the way we go through our 100% city engagement model. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do that mean we're not going to be able to be quick, and sometimes we make our horses into camels. And so I really, my only thing is that we should really, really think about how we're making our decisions, and that should be a place of innovation as well.
Okay, I like that one. Keep going.
I think we have to be very careful about how we define what we're going to do. I mean, what I'm hearing is, we should look at a county-wide integrated signal thing, and I don't think that's what we want to talk about here. What I think we need to refocus that kind of conversation here. What are the cities and the routes where you have light rail traveling? And what do you do to improve signalization of those, not necessarily countywide? Take a look at, major corridors of transportation like El Camino, which would be Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Palo Alto, and what are you working with Caltrain or Caltran to see what you could do to do signal prioritization there? Take the idea of implementing technology improvements, but being a little bit more targeted with them than saying, here we want to have kind of a countywide discussion about signal, projects.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in?
So I'll sort of do my top three kind of. I agree with the trying to use better use of our right-of-ways. Having rails really limit things. It doesn't make sense to me to build more things with rails. Things with rubber tires can go off in multiple directions. I did like that concept of, okay, maybe you have a train of rubber tire things and one goes off down one road, but they're using a guideway that allows them to do a large portion of the travel time faster kind of thing. So I like those kinds of ideas. It gets back, but I want to get back to also, again, there's this stigma about riding buses for a lot of people. People are a lot more willing to ride rail, and a lot of times we fight for, we want a rail up 85 because we know that those kinds of commuters will ride rails, but there's a stigma against buses. So that gets to my other point I made earlier about innovations in the experience so that we can get people more excited about riding something that maybe we don't call it a bus, but it, you know, it is a bus kind of thing. I don't know what that is, but that keeps coming to mind. We need a way that to innovate the experience so people don't feel like it's the old bus that has a stigma. And then to the business model thing, I wanted to go back to the thinking in terms of where can we also make money. And I gave the example of, well, if we've got a bus with a business center in it, we charge a little more. Find things, actually think in terms of, you know, in our process of delivering a service, think of ways where we can make a little money that we can then use to fund other parts. Maybe we can fund more coverage in places we need it that don't generate a lot of money. And I wanted to use Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority as an example. We're a utility that, you know, we have ratepayers and we set rates, and we don't want to gouge our ratepayers, and we've actually been able to set our rates below PG&E. But we also look carefully at how much profit we're making. We're filling our reserves because we're new, but we're also thinking in terms of our goal is decarbonization. So the extra money that we make, we want to put towards programs of decarbonization. You could do the same thing with VTA, as if we can make money in some innovative ways, we can then put it back into other places that are part of our mission, but really don't pay for themselves.
Staff, how many public speaker cards do we have? 2? Okay. Unless somebody, I'm going to get a couple more, and then I'm going to do a hard cut at 12:15. Okay.
And I'm actually going to have to leave for another meeting, but I just need to add only because I represent a community that was impacted by BRT, that was Alum Rock corridor, and so whatever it is that this governing body, along with our community, of course, decides to do in whichever direction we decide to go in. I just want to be able to say and express that we have to be very cognizant of the impact that we have on residents and businesses as we go on in there. If we tear up streets, if we block driveways, if we do whatever we need to do to build out or build in or dig up. And so we have to be very cognizant of that. We do great work where there's open space, and we lay out whether it's rail or just new pavement. But sometimes, like in the example of Alum Rock, we didn't do such a great job. Okay. And so we have to make sure that we're very, very cognizant of the impacts that we have on our residents, and very cognizant of the impacts that we have, especially on small businesses. We have the ability of shutting them down, and those businesses of never opening back up. And so I'm going to keep emphasizing that over and over and over. It happened on Alum Rock, and I wouldn't want to see that happen again.
Okay, thank you. So I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to the chair, and let me see. So why don't you go ahead, John? Who else wants to talk? So we can.
I was just going to do my.
John, go ahead.
Okay. What I'd like to see is innovation money given to so they have a budget, and that they are informative about that and get it out to the various cities, transportation cities, departments as quickly as possible. I think the decision-making process it needs to be streamlined. I mean, we're working on SR 85, and we started in 2015, so that's been a 3 or 4 year process. So part of that is the governance boards themselves trying to make up their minds, and the actually of repurposing dollars to invest in innovation and in new technology, and not relying on decisions that were made years ago.
Any other board members that wish to make any comments before I go to the public?
Can I add one?
Oh, Mr. Prowlis.
So I think in regards to our workforce, I think we need to make a pretty clear statement. Obviously, at times it's inevitable to avoid layoffs or what we're doing with our budget. But when we talk about self-imposed innovative strategies that we're going to partake in, I think we need to be very clear with our workforce that whether it's this model of agile organization, I think regardless of that, or if we say, okay, this is a model we want to adopt, I think we have to make a very clear statement that says that if and when we make a self-imposed innovative strategy or approach, that we will not, an employee will not lose their employment due to those decisions, right? And so we are going to preserve, whether it's through training in this agile organization, but that through our own decisions, we're not going to have employees lose their jobs. And so I think that that's something that we need to consider, certainly something that I would want to support, knowing that these would be decisions that we would be able to make and forecast. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Not seeing any other lights from board members. Then I will go to comments from the public, and the first one is Asen Ndai. Is he still here?
Hi, Asen NDI. Hi, Asen NDI with Working Partnerships. Really excited that VTA is taking this on. I think it's really good that we're getting policies and programs in place ahead of the technological improvements that are coming our way. So I want to make a few points. First, VTA should be thinking of ways to utilize technology for the public good that grows our ridership, attracts, trains, and retains our employees, and protects taxpayers from potential liabilities. How VTA chooses to adopt new technology will determine whether it will lead to worker displacement and decreasing job quality, or whether it will lead to a future where technology supports more productive workers and more middle-wage jobs through upskilling. Second, the biggest impediment to any changes cited in this meeting is not technology or labor issues, but political will. As we saw with the issue of road pricing, the El Camino Real BRT, and the less than enthusiastic implementation of signal priority, the biggest changes to the transportation system are not technological, but political. The way that you get people out of cars is that you make transit more convenient and pleasant than driving, and that's a political problem, not a tech problem. Third, I want to highlight something that I think is very specific to Santa Clara County. 40% of our population is foreign-born, and that percentage is growing. Part of the reason why we need to think through the workforce issue is that we provide a human service for people who may be unfamiliar with our country, our language, and our transportation system. And then I'll make one more point, which is that in the future, one of the most important things is that VTA is going to need to fund itself. We think that we should be thinking about how to monetize these new investments and figure out how to capture the value that VTA may be creating. I hope that future meetings will also be thinking about the future of VTA's business.
Thank you for your comments. So Roland, followed by Edward Mason, and then Blair Beekman.
Thank you. So you all asked what's the problem, and basically it was on the first slide. You bring up your phone, Santa Teresa Light Rail, bring up Google Maps, say, I want to go Santa Teresa Light Rail. The answer is, if I take transit, it's going to take me an hour. If I drive, it's going to take 22 minutes. That's the problem. That's what you have to fix. So you have two options. You can start slowing the cars down, or you can start improving the transit. And if you improve the speed of transit, with the studies that say 85% of people who currently drive will not. So how do you get there? Well, Caltrain and BART are very popular because they're already there. BART is 70, Caltrain is 80, getting up to 110. And the light rate is 55. All of you say it over and over again. 55 was the limit when Clinton was president from IATA. Okay, it's back to 1985. But now on freeways we're doing 80 miles an hour. The only technology that can do this was not on any of these slides. It's called trains. trains can do 70 miles an hour. And it goes very tightly focused downtown, but once they on the freeway, it'll be 70 miles an hour. The advances in battery technology, we all keyed in on that. What that allows you to do is once you get off the backbone, you carry on trucking, and you got the batteries. So when you're on the backbone, you're charging, and then you peel off and you go wherever you want to go. Right now, Bombardiers make real trains that can do 60 miles without charging. I'm talking about real trains, not light rail. Your light rail infrastructure, you have to keep it absolutely. Don't start ripping down catenaries because that is your charging backbone for the whole of Santa Clara County, even if you don't run light rail on it. Right? That's your power grid to charge Santa Clara County. And I'm glad you got a bit of everything except electrification. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Edward Mason, followed by Blair Beekman.
Thank you. The one thing that's missing in this, I think, is the culture of convenience. We now have where you can tap the app and get a McDonald's delivered to you, and now you have Uber and Lyft as a result of that. I think we suffer also from affluency or affluenza, and we lack a real social responsibility to be responsible individuals to take transit. I think the just misconnection was exemplified last night when I came from San Francisco, because I got to see at 2nd and Santa Clara the lights of the light rail departing as the 181 came into 2nd and Santa Clara. The Corinthian, go on their website and look, and they say, so your employees can use our bus so they don't have to take transit. They have that right on the website, so you don't have to take transit. With this discussion, I think we also need to be considering Senate Bill 50 and monitor that for the implications of how the land use is going to be in the area. And years ago, when I attended these meetings, there was one person a month on the board that would volunteer to take transit and report back on it the following month. So the question that I have is, how many of the individuals in this room are taking transit to their next destination? Now, I came here on light rail. Took me an hour and 20 minutes or so just from Willow Glen. And the point was, the light rail, as I came on the 37 bus, the light rail was departing. So I had to wait for the next one. Okay, I can live with that. But the point is that culture of convenience is paramount. So whatever innovation we do, and I'm grateful for this session because it's really great, I really appreciate it, we need to consider the customer and that level of the culture of convenience that we're in right now. And how, so you make it, you think they're going to come, but will the culture of convenience respond? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry I'm late to this meeting. It sounds like you've covered a lot, and with the last points about life on the east side of San Jose, I hope that you'll be practicing, and to tie it in, I guess, to what the theme of this meeting was about technology, I hope in east side of San Jose, when you're going to be bringing in technology and surveillance practices, that it's minimal. The idea of minimalism is an important concept to me. It's an artistic concept, and from that, I think we can ourselves develop very interesting ideas about how to gauge technology, surveillance technology for the future of the area. It's not, I don't want life to be like San Francisco in 2005, you know, where we just dump in tons of stuff and say we're practicing good civil protections for everybody. It's not that way anymore. It should be a very minimal system that respects people. And I hope you really take my words to heart that, you know, I'm just a little pipsqueak here, but I'm talking about what real innovation is right now for the next 10 years is about accountability and openness and good guidelines. And that's the work that I'm involved with. And I really hope you respect that and want to practice it because it's fun, it's enjoyable, and it just builds our good future. It takes us out of war. It takes us out of 9/11 into the sustainable community future we're all looking towards and looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beekman. Is there any other member of the public that wish to address the board? Okay, seeing none. Since this is an information item, this discussion, we don't need any motions, but thank you for your very vigorous and rigorous participation today, and to the staff for all the preparation work. Does anybody have an announcement they'd like to make? Okay, so we have I'll make a couple of announcements. We have 2 groundbreaking events next month. The first is a joint event with Caltrans for the US 101 Managed Lanes, groundbreaking on March 8th, and the second is the Matilda US 101 237 interchange, groundbreaking on Friday, March 22nd. And I hope to see you all at our next Board of Directors meeting, Thursday, March 7th, 5:30 p.m. in the County Board of Supervisors chambers at 70 West Heading Street. Not here, but 70 West Heading Street. So with that, I think we can adjourn for the day. And again, thank you, Jeannie. Did you have any final words?
No, I want to take a moment to really thank staff. There was a lot of work trying to go behind this and trying to leave us with things to think about versus telling us all the answers, right? So staff, thank you for the amount of time you've put into this and for successfully pulling this off. And thank you to all my colleagues up here in terms of indulging me as your facilitator.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Jeannie. Great job. So the Safety, Security, Transit Planning and Operations Committee, SSTPO, is meeting immediately following, or maybe they've already started, in conference room B106. So thank you all.